Chapter 12:01. They were king tears, yet they could only be used as bait. This caused Ling Han and the others to feel extremely sullen. However, this was the truth. Regardless of how talented they were still nothing in front of the power of an eternal river tier elite. As a result, Wuxia had been sacrificed, becoming a vessel for the netherworld elite. In the end, he had been mercilessly killed. In the eyes of the blue-skinned elite, the top prodigies of this galaxy were like rubble. They didn't even have the right to make him hesitate. This kind of fate could have befallen any one of them. Why did it have to be Wuxia? It was only because his divine sense was the weakest among the 7 of them. As such, it was the easiest for him to be possessed. They couldn't accept such an outcome. They could die in battle, but such a death would be far too useless and worthless. However, who could they complain to? The blue-skinned elite was dead, and the netherworld elite was also dead. Even their true creditor, Wuxia, was dead. The 6 of them were speechless for a long time. Only the yellow spring continued to surge. This was formed from the body of an eternal river tier elite, and even though millions of years had passed, it was still surging endlessly. It was as if there was no end to it. They all understood why this yellow spring was so eerie and frightening. It was because this was a power from the netherworld. Shirangguo was the first to break the silence, and said, "Let's return to the palace and see if we can obtain some more secret techniques." Everyone nodded. The matter had already passed, and the dead couldn't be revived. There was no point in continuing to dwell on it. They returned to the palace, and the light orbs were still silently floating in the sky. However, when they made a move, these light orbs would still dodge, not giving them any chance to snatch them. With their strength, they wouldn't be able to obtain any more treasures here. Since the 6 of them were the young king tiers of the current generation, they naturally knew when to let go. They decisively didn't go to the light orbs in the sky, and instead returned resolutely. There were still many valuable things on the way back, such as godly medicines and ancient buildings. Perhaps there would be ancient techniques left behind in these buildings. Staying here was a complete waste of time. If they returned, they would at least obtain some treasures, albeit more or less. After leaving the palace, they took one last look at the place where Wuxia had died. However, not even a single complete bone was left behind. All of them shook their heads and strode away. After leaving for a long while, Ling Han released Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun from the Black Tower. When that old ginseng also appeared, his expression darkened, and he said, "Damn brat, what kind of spatial vessel is that? Why is it so freakish?" He had almost been planted by the artifact spirit inside, and his mind had almost been erased, turning him into a divine medicine of heaven and earth for human consumption. There was also an old divine tree inside, and its grade was who knew how many levels higher than his. He had to obediently call it Grandpa. Also, the divine soul of a saint was entwined around the branches of the old tree. Although the divine aura was no longer there, it still made him tremble in fear. Ling Han chuckled and said, "Fun, right? Fun your sister. If Grandpa Ginseng doesn't stomp you to death, you actually dare to scare your grandpa." The more the old ginseng spoke, the angrier he became. He kicked out at Ling Han. Ling Han blocked a few attacks, and the old ginseng was only venting. He didn't want to turn against Ling Han, so he naturally stopped. "What a big temper," Ling Han said with a smile. The old ginseng's eyes swiveled, and he said to Shui Yenyu, "Beauty, do you want to change partners? Grandpa Ginseng is definitely better than that brat." Grandpa Ginseng's body is full of treasures. Just taking a breath of it can increase your lifespan by 3 years, and make you 10 years younger. I-oh. He was hit on the head by Ling Han, and instantly clutched his head and cried out in pain. They walked back, and returned to the Herb Mountain in a few days. Ling Han began to break the restrictions again, and tried to collect as many high-level godly medicines as he could. However, the amount of time needed to break through a single prohibition was far too long. Therefore, after obtaining 2 stalks of godly medicine, they were forced to return. They walked against the yellow spring, and soon arrived at the place where they had first entered. There were already a great many people waiting here. Because there were only a mere 3 days until the half-year deadline, they naturally had to rush here in advance. If they missed the opportunity to leave, then they could only wait for death here. Master! Ding Ping ran over first, followed by Mu Rongqing and the others. These people hadn't reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier, so they hadn't gone to places like the Eagle's Beak Mountain. Instead, they had deviated from the normal route, and were searching for their own fated opportunities. Their gains were quite plentiful. Second brother still hasn't returned? Ling Han asked. The Rain Emperor was missing from the group that had entered. Feng Peyun and the others all shook their heads. Because everyone had moved separately, they didn't know what fated opportunities the Rain Emperor had encountered, or what trouble he had encountered. With second brother's strength and intelligence, even if he encountered any trouble, he should be able to successfully escape, Ling Han said. He had this kind of confidence in the Rain Emperor. Big sister Shui, ninth king, why are you two here? Li Weiwei and Ji Yun walked over. They were also disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect, so they were naturally allowed to enter this place. Ling Han hadn't acknowledged them before, so they didn't know Ling Han's identity. They only felt it was very strange. Why would Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun be together with such a strange man? Especially Shui Yanyu. Wasn't she on intimate terms with Ling Han? Could it be that she had dumped Ling Han just because he hadn't appeared for 3 years? That stupid blockhead was so pitiful. Shui Yanyu nodded at the two girls, and Hu Feiyun immediately became enthusiastic. She immediately chatted with the two girls. She was very young, so she naturally yearned for playmates of the same age to share her joys and sorrows. Thankfully, Hu Feiyun still kept the secret that Han Lin was Ling Han, and didn't say anything. This was only because Li Weiwei and Ji Yun didn't ask. Otherwise, Ling Han didn't believe that she could keep her mouth shut with her muddle-headedness. However, 1 or 2 days passed, and the Rain Emperor still didn't appear. This time, Ling Han and the others were all anxious. There was still 1 more day before the Mystery Realm would reopen, and everyone had to leave. Otherwise, those who stayed would stay forever. What had happened to the Rain Emperor? Amidst everyone's anxiety, the 3rd day arrived as promised, but there was still no sign of the Rain Emperor. Wang, space twisted, and a door silently opened, revealing a passageway. One could see a giant opening his hands and tearing open this space. Venerable Trinity. We can leave. Let's go. Everyone left, but because there were too many people, the evacuation couldn't be completed in a short time. Where's second brother? Why isn't he back yet? Mu Rongqing was anxious. Ling Han was also anxious, but he suddenly had a thought, and said, second brother might be the chosen one. What chosen one? Feng Peyun and the others asked. Ling Han said, previously, I entered the residence of the master of this place. He once left a message, saying that when the 7 stars are in place, my successor will appear. The 7 stars should be me, He Tao, and the others. We opened the palace together, and my successor has appeared. That senior should have chosen a successor. I originally thought it would be one of the 7 people, but now it should be someone else. It's very likely to be second brother. Chapter 1202. Second brother has obtained the inheritance of an eternal river tier elite. Mu Rongqing became excited. That must be the case. With second brother's talent, he definitely has the right to do so. Feng Peyun nodded slowly. He had to admit that the Rain Emperor's talent might not be inferior to Ling Han's. This brat is really lucky, Helian Tianyun said with slight jealousy. Ling Han thinking this way was only to make himself feel at ease, and more importantly, to give himself hope. Otherwise, he would lose a second brother forever. The crowd walked out, but Ling Han and the others didn't move. That was what they said, but they didn't have any concrete information. They couldn't be sure that the Rain Emperor had obtained the inheritance, so they wanted to wait a little longer. Finally, only they hadn't left. "Hurry up and come out!" Venerable Trinity shouted. Why were these guys still lingering? Didn't they know that even he had to expend a great deal of effort to maintain the passage? Ling Han nodded, grabbed everyone, and left the mystery realm. "Xiao," the passage immediately closed. Venerable Trinity said, "Leave quickly." "Yes." With this supreme elite opening the path, everyone quickly left the valley. Venerable Trinity didn't care anymore, and directly flew into the sky. He Tao, Shenzhu, Ling Han, a heavenly body tier elite called out. They were the names of the 7 young king tiers. "Quickly return to the sect and report to the 7 Rain Hall." Ling Han and the others hurriedly accepted the order, but Wuzhou would forever stay in the mystery realm, unable to return to the sect. They also understood that the sect naturally summoned them for the inheritance they had obtained in the palace. The sect already knew that the 7 of them could open the door to the treasure vault if they worked together. Thus, after they left the mystery realm, they naturally had to summon them and ask about their gains. If it was valuable enough, the sect would naturally make a copy. Everyone returned. The disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect returned to the Majestic Heaven sect, and those who didn't return to their own places. This was Death Valley, and apart from the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, there was no other value. Naturally, no one would stay here. Ling Han and the others didn't leave immediately. They still wanted to wait for the Rain Emperor. But 10 days had passed, and there was still no sign of the Rain Emperor. "Let's go. If second brother really obtains the inheritance, then when he's accomplished in his art, he'll naturally come back to find us," Feng Piyun said. Ling Han thought about it and nodded. There was no point in waiting here. Besides, he had received orders to return to the sect as soon as possible. If this was Venerable Trinity's intention, and he made this elite wait for too long, even Empress Luan Xing wouldn't be able to protect him. They returned to the Majestic Heaven sect. With the cloud-piercing shuttle, their speed was naturally ridiculously fast. Although they had waited an extra 10 days, they had only returned to the sect a day or 2 later than the others. Ling Han first went to the 7 Rain Hall, which was located on the cloud-piercing peak of the main peak. However, when he reported his name and was summoned by an elite of the Sun-Moon tier, he Tao and the others did not arrive. Presumably, they had already been here before, or perhaps they had not yet returned to the sect. "What secret technique did you obtain from the treasure trove?" the Sun-Moon tier elite asked directly. Presumably, Shenzhu and the others had already returned and told him the truth. This wasn't strange. The problem was, did these people really report the secret technique that they had obtained? Did they casually report a cultivation technique? Ling Han hesitated. Should he hand over the star-plucking step? In the few days that he had been waiting and returning, he had continuously studied this movement technique. However, even after comprehending it under the reincarnation tree for more than 10 days, Ling Han still hadn't been able to grasp this movement technique. In fact, he was still quite far from mastering it. One could imagine how high the level of this movement technique was. Handing it over for no reason. "Ha, don't worry, the sect won't take your secret technique for free. They will definitely give you a corresponding reward," the Sun-Moon tier elite said. Ling Han thought for a moment. Even if he wanted to find another secret technique to replace the star-plucking step, he wouldn't be able to find one in a short time. Whether it was the 9 Dragons Tyrant Body Art, the Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow, or the Universal 8 Desolation Technique, the value of these secret techniques might not be lower than the star-plucking step. In fact, they might even surpass it. Thus, he thought for a moment, and then said, "I obtained a movement technique called the star-plucking step." Write down the secret technique, and you will be rewarded according to its level," the Sun-Moon tier elite urged. Ling Han nodded, and began to write down the movement technique. However, after writing down a paragraph, he was astonished. This was because there was a part of the inheritance that could only be understood, and couldn't be expressed in words or language. Moreover, after skipping this part, the might of this movement technique would plummet. He faltered slightly. So be it. In any case, he wasn't greedy for any reward from the sect. He continued to write, and soon finished copying. He put away his brush. I'm done. The Sun Moon Tier elite took the copy, but didn't flip through it. Instead, he immediately sealed it with a decree. In this way, it would be easily discovered if it was opened before being handed over. You can leave first. After we appraise the level of this movement technique, you will naturally be rewarded according to your contributions. Ling Han nodded, bowed, and left. He was very busy now. He had pill recipes to comprehend, and he had movement techniques to practice. Moreover, he was probably not far from the peak stage of the pinnacle level. After that, he would have to comprehend the regulations of heaven and earth of the Sun Moon Tier. This would definitely take a very long time. He felt that he didn't have enough time. Ling Han cultivated in seclusion. One moment, he would comprehend pill recipes, and the next, he would practice the star-plucking step. Time passed quietly without him realizing it. However, a dark ripple quietly appeared, and it was becoming more and more intense. Gao Huang complained to the sect, accusing Ling Han of wantonly slaughtering fellow disciples in the mystery realm, and stealing the thousand-source true fluid that originally belonged to the Gao faction. At first, this matter was kept to the higher-ups of the sect, and not many people knew about it. However, suddenly, this news spread throughout the entire Majestic Heaven sect, and all the disciples knew about it. Instantly, an uproar broke out. It was a great taboo for sect disciples to kill each other, and they would be looked down upon by everyone. However, there were still many disciples in the sect at the Eagle Beak Mountain, and they learned part of the truth at that time. Ling Han had suppressed everyone, and obtained 4 drops of thousand-source true fluid. However, no one knew whether the members of the Gao faction had died at Ling Han's hands or not. This was because the battle had taken place after the competition for the thousand-source true fluid had ended, so no one knew the truth. However, the Majestic Heaven sect didn't just have disciples at the Mountain River Tier. There were also disciples at the Sun Moon Tier. Moreover, only a small portion of people had discovered the truth at the time. Now, rumors of Ling Han killing his fellow disciples for the sake of the thousand-source true fluid were everywhere. As time passed, even the lies had become the truth. Killing others and stealing their treasures, and moreover, they were fellow disciples of the same sect, so this was naturally hated by others. Ling Han's newly rising reputation was immediately dealt a heavy blow, and many people expressed their disdain for him. How could such a person be worthy of staying in the sect? Wave after wave of voices rang out, demanding that Ling Han be severely punished. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough to appease their anger. Chapter 1204. Ling Han decided to play it by ear. Although there were rumors circulating in the sect that were detrimental to him, that was only true for the wise. He believed that those who could enter into the Majestic Heaven sect were naturally all intelligent people. As this kind of rumor continued to spread, it should very quickly lose its market value. He still went to the Mo clan establishment and sold a large number of alchemical pills. Moreover, he also made a copy of the pill recipe. This was an ancient recipe that might have been lost in the modern world. He should be able to sell it for a good price. He also decided to sell the thousand-source true fluid. Don't you want it, Gao Huang? I won't give it to you. Ling Han really didn't need the thousand-source true fluid. It could only help him comprehend Tao, but it couldn't increase his cultivation level. Comprehending Tao under the reincarnation tree couldn't increase his comprehension ability, but he could make up for it with time. If he couldn't comprehend it in a day or two, what about 8 or 10 years? This was equivalent to a different kind of thousand-source true fluid, and it was endless. Thus, Ling Han naturally wanted to sell the thousand-source true fluid to increase his wealth so that he could buy godly metal to increase the quality of the divine demon sword. In any case, before the divine demon sword reached the quality of divine metal, Ling Han was destined to be poor. If he had any money, he would have to spend it on the divine demon sword. However, the divine demon sword's might had already begun to show, and it was no weaker than Ling Han's battle prowess. It would be worth it no matter how much money he spent. He told Han Hua this, and the latter was immediately stunned. He then happily agreed, and after discussing with Ling Han, they decided to hold an auction. The auction items would be the 1000-source true fluid, ancient pill recipes, and alchemical pills that Ling Han had provided. Good things like the 1000-source true fluid and ancient pill recipes had to be auctioned to maximize their value. As for the alchemical pills, they could definitely be sold for a higher price than usual. Businessmen were indeed different. They were much more thorough and meticulous than Ling Han. Ling Han nodded, and left everything to Han Hua to handle. Meanwhile, he returned to the majestic heaven sect. He still had to cultivate the star-plucking step and comprehend new pill recipes. When he returned to the palace, he saw that the old ginseng was currently chatting and laughing with Li Weiwei and Ji Yun. He was massaging the two girls' shoulders, and one of his ginseng roots took the opportunity to reach into the girls' collars in search of serenity. This ginseng is hopeless. Although you have transformed into a human form, you are only the size of a child's arm. What can you do? Ling Han shook his head, but what were Li Weiwei and the other girl doing here? You blockhead, you actually dared to hide this from us. Li Weiwei immediately jumped up upon reaching Ling Han, causing the old ginseng to clench his teeth in anger. That was because one of his ginseng roots had been stuck in Li Weiwei's chest, and he hadn't been able to pull it out in time. Li Weiwei didn't notice at all that Ling Han had arrived. He just snickered to himself. Who asked the old ginseng to take advantage of her? Just nice, this ginseng root would be his compensation to Li Weiwei. The roots of the old ginseng were indeed extremely nutritious. Ling Han had only plucked one root and consumed it. The rest were deposited on the body of the old ginseng. Now that Li Weiwei had unintentionally obtained one, it was naturally greatly beneficial to her cultivation and physique. Ling Han smiled faintly, and asked, "How did you guys find out?" Hee, I don't believe that big sister Shui is the kind of person who would change her mind at the sight of someone else. Thus, I pestered the 9th king to ask her, and she quickly spilled the secret, Li Weiwei said proudly. True enough, this girl Hu Feiyun was completely unreliable. She was a clone of Empress Yuan Xing, and her personality was a part of the Empress. Thus, it was inevitable that there would be some imperfections in her personality, and some of her personality would be magnified to the extreme. For example, Hu Feiyun was naive and muddle-headed. This was a personality that Empress Yuan Xing had severed. At first, it was only a small part of Empress Yuan Xing, but now it was Hu Feiyun's entire personality. Blockhead, what do you plan to do? Everyone outside is talking about you killing people and stealing their treasures. Li Weiwei quickly put aside the matter of Ling Han hiding his identity, and began to worry for him. It's fine. I'll deal with whatever comes my way. There's nothing I can't deal with, Ling Han said with a smile. You sure talk big. Li Weiwei humphed. However, seeing that Ling Han was brimming with confidence, she also relaxed. After all, Ling Han had come out of the chaotic star's majestic empire, and had encountered many dangers, but hadn't he resolved all of them? Feng Peiyun, Ding Ping, and the others came over to ask, but were also calmly comforted by Ling Han, and they left. He could handle this matter by himself. However, in the next few days, Ling Han didn't have any time to properly cultivate. Xiao Sisi, Xia Wuk, Su Jing, and the others all came over, and extended an olive branch to Ling Han. As long as Ling Han was willing to join their camp, they would do their best to help Ling Han resolve this problem. Ling Han smiled and declined. He didn't plan to join anyone. Wasn't he cultivating so hard for the sake of breathing the air of freedom and being his true self? Afterward, He Tao and the other king tiers also came over, and said the same words as Xiao Sisi and the others. They wanted to recruit Ling Han. This was because Ling Han had come from a small world, and he had no roots in the immortal realm. Thus, They didn't have to worry about recruiting him and entrusting him with an important task, only to discover that he was a spy from another sect. Ling Han naturally wouldn't agree. At this moment, news suddenly spread that the sect was seriously considering the matter of Ling Han slaughtering his fellow disciples. It was possible that a public trial would be held in a few days. Gao Huang was finally going to show his sword. On the same night that the news spread, a Sun Moon tier elite appeared in front of Ling Han's palace. I am Zhou Tong. This Sun Moon tier elite looked to be in his 30s, but he had already formed 2 suns and moons. His strength was truly terrifying. There was a proud expression on his face, and he said, I've come on the orders of the young master. I'll give you one last chance. Immediately hand over 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid. Otherwise, you'll be regarded as the eternal sinner of the sect, and forever be nailed to the pillar of shame. Ling Han smiled, and said, Why would you rather be a lackey for someone else than be a Sun Moon tier elite? How dare you? Zhou Tong was instantly enraged, and divine flames roared around his body. Ling Han waved his hand, and said, Don't be so fierce to me. You've only cultivated for a few 100,000 years more than me. Do you believe that I'll be able to beat you up in another 10 years? These words were extremely domineering. A mountain river tier cultivator actually said that he would be able to beat an elite at the medium extreme of the Sun Moon tier in 10 years? Who would believe him? However, Zhou Tong's pupils contracted. With this brat's freakish cultivation speed, it really was possible, though he didn't really believe it. He humphed, and said, If you don't hand over the 1000 source true fluid, you won't be able to survive this trial at all. What 10 years? Ling Han smiled faintly. He now had the pill recipe for the Berserk Blood Spirit pill, and there was also a Red Rain Divine King tree in the Black Tower. Once he advanced to the Sun Moon tier, he would definitely be able to refine many Berserk Blood Spirit pills. It could be imagined that his cultivation level would increase by leaps and bounds at some point in time. Go back and tell Gao Huang that if he wants the 1000 source true fluid, he'll have to bring enough true origin stones and participate in the auction in 3 months, Ling Han said. This was a good opportunity to advertise for free. Reading on a mobile phone. Chapter 1205. Zhou Tong left with his fury and Ling Han's reply. He, a mighty elite of the Sun Moon tier, was actually being threatened by a mountain river tier cultivator. This made him very displeased, but who asked him to be the one to deliver himself to Ling Han on his own accord? If he reported this to the sect, it would only be disadvantageous to him. As long as Ling Han still had the identity of a seed, no one could humiliate him. The news that the Mo clan establishment was going to auction the 1000 source origin quickly caused a huge uproar. This auction also received the full support of the Mo clan main family. They mobilized the entire Mo clan main family to spread the news. Thus, the news quickly spread throughout the entire galaxy. Even many heavenly body tier elites were tempted. The 1000 source true fluid had been formed by an eternal river tier elite, and with the comprehension of heaven and earth at this level, it was a precious treasure even to heavenly body tier elites. Perhaps it couldn't allow the peak stage of the heavenly body tier to break through to the eternal river tier, but it was still very possible for the low extreme of the heavenly body tier to break through to the medium extreme to break through to the high extreme, and so on. And what does it mean to take such a step forward? His strength would undergo earth-shattering changes, and his lifespan would increase by 10 million years. 10 million years. With such a long period of time, he might be able to obtain new opportunities and advance to a higher realm. Thus, not only were Sun Moon tier elites tempted, but even many heavenly body tier elites were also heading toward the flying cloud planet. This was also the reason why the auction would be held 3 months later. It was to give the investors enough time to rush over. Of course, the Mo clan had also invited some alchemists. This group of people were truly wealthy, and for the sake of ancient pill recipes, they would definitely fight for a price that would make one speechless. Ling Han didn't need to do anything. He had given Han Hu full authority over the auction. All he needed to do was hand over the 1,000 source true fluid to Han Hua on the day of the auction. He didn't hand over the 1,000 source true fluid now because it was safest to leave it with Ling Han. Due to the preciousness of the 1,000 source true fluid, this auction instantly became the hottest topic. However, the Gao faction's actions were also becoming more and more exaggerated. Evidently, they wanted to get hold of Ling Han before the auction. Otherwise, once he was on the auction stage, they could only compete with their wealth. However, the Majestic Heaven sect wasn't the Gao faction. Senior apprentice brother Han. That night, a guest came to pay a visit. Fan Ru led the other in. She was a charming beauty with an enchanting figure. She was so charming that it seemed like water could drip from her body. She curtsied towards Ling Han and said, "This little sister is Ji Yunji." "Junior sister Ji, what's the matter?" Ling Han asked casually, as if he had not noticed that the person standing in front of him was a seductress that could make one blush and palpitate. Fan Ru, who was at the side, did not even dare to look Ji Yunji in the eye, afraid that her soul would be taken away. Ji Yunji was astonished. She was naturally very clear about how charming she was. This was not only because she was born beautiful, but also because she deliberately walked the path of seduction. It was also because of the cultivation method that she cultivated, which allowed her to be dazzling and moving. Every move she made emitted a seductive and sexy feeling. But Ling Han didn't even look her in the eye, which was unacceptable to her. Usually, men could not wait to stick their eyes on her body, but Ling Han seemed to be too lazy to even look at her. She calmed her mind, and said, "This little sister has come on the orders of young Master Hua Yangwen Hua. I wish to ask for Brother Ling's convenience in selling a drop of 1,000 source true fluid to the Hua faction." Hua faction, Ling Han gave an "oh." After becoming enemies with the Gao faction, he specially went to investigate, and found out that among the 9 disciples of Venerable Trinity, there was a disciple called Hua Yongning, who was ranked 6th. Then, this Hua faction was naturally the faction that Hua Yongning had established. Additionally, Gao Feng was ranked 4th among the 9 great disciples. Though this was only based on the order of their master, to a certain extent, it was also a ranking of the faction's strength. Ho ho, young master will not let senior brother Ling suffer a loss. Ji Yunji smiled sweetly. What young mistress means is for senior apprentice brother Ling to only auction off 3 drops of 1,000 source true fluid, and young mistress will purchase it at the same price as the lowest of the 3 drops. This indeed could not be counted as letting Ling Han suffer a loss, because if 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid were to be auctioned together, then the cheapest drop might be lower than the lowest price of 3 drops being auctioned together. After all, the smaller the quantity, the more intense the bidding. For my sake, the Hua faction is going to start a war with the Gao faction? Ling Han asked. Ho ho, any sect is filled with competition. As the saying goes, the weak are the strong, and the strong survive, Ji Yunji said calmly. Among the 9 disciples of Venerable Trinity, only one can obtain the final true inheritance, and shoulder the great responsibility of leading the Majestic Heaven sect. Thus, even if it was not for senior brother Han, the Hua faction and the Gao faction would not be able to avoid a war. Ling Han nodded. The lower levels had the competition of the lower levels, and the upper levels had the competition of the upper levels. How covetous was the inheritance of the eternal river Tyr? If one obtained it, who knew, they might be able to sweep through this galaxy and become the only king. How many people could resist such a temptation? No wonder those 9 disciples had all established their own factions, all for the sake of increasing their own bargaining chips so that they could obtain the true inheritance. However, Venerable Trinity did not express his stance even after a long time, and even had the intention of taking Yang Hao as his 10th disciple. This was actually sending out a signal that Venerable Trinity was not very satisfied with these 9 disciples. If the 9 disciples fought fiercely now, it was very possible that they would end up empty-handed when the time came, with nothing to gain. Ling Han smiled. What did this have to do with him? He thought for a moment, and said, "All right, I can leave 1 drop of 1,000 source true fluid for young Master Hua. In any case, he would not suffer a loss. Senior brother Han is indeed a man of character. I thank you on behalf of young master in advance. Ji Yunji stood up, and curtsied towards Ling Han. Her neck hung low, revealing a large patch of snow-white skin on her chest, and the bulge was impressively voluptuous. What a seductive beauty! Ling Han's expression was calm. He had often been seduced by Shui Yenyu, this great vixen, so he naturally had an extremely strong resistance to temptation. Furthermore, compared to the exceptional beauty of Empress Wan Xing, Ji Yunji was at the level of a village girl, so how could his heart possibly be disturbed? Ji Yunji raised her head, and saw that Ling Han's expression was calm. There was not the slightest sign of accelerated heartbeat or rapid breathing, and she couldn't help but be filled with curiosity. According to her understanding, at this moment, Ling Han's lower body should have already reacted, and he would make a fool of himself in front of her. Then, she would be able to gain a psychological advantage, and if she stated some conditions, Ling Han would probably agree without any hesitation in his flustered state. This guy doesn't like women. Ji Yunji guessed in her mind, but this was naturally not something that she could ask aloud. She spoke without saying anything, and took the opportunity to seduce Ling Han a few more times. However, it was all to no avail, and she could only leave in resignation. Good milk. The old ginseng popped out from somewhere, and looked as if he was fuming with rage at Ling Han. That little thing is obviously seducing you. Why don't you do it? Even if you don't do it, you should still let her take it off, and let Grandpa Ginseng have a feast for my eyes. Get lost. Ling Han kicked out. This perverted ginseng was definitely beyond saving. Chapter 1206. The Hua faction was very powerful. From the second day onwards, people were talking about the truth of the Eagle Beak Mountain incident. Ling Han had obtained 4 drops of thousand source true fluid by himself, creating history. In truth, someone had said this before, but it had immediately been drowned out by the overwhelming public opinion that was against Ling Han. But now, it was the Hua faction that was putting in the effort. It was just like how the Gao faction had easily allowed the image of Ling Han being an executioner who killed and robbed others of their treasures to be deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. The power of the Hua faction was naturally not something that any individual could compare to. Even if young king tiers like He Tao and Shen Zhu spoke up, it was useless. How could the Hua faction and the Gao faction, which had been operating for tens of thousands of years, compare to them? Now that the Hua faction and the Gao faction had begun their battle, the public opinion naturally could not be one-sided anymore. Instead, 2 voices were clashing. One side was slandering Ling Han, while the other side was setting up a positive image for Ling Han. The truth was actually not important. What was important was which of the 2 factions was stronger. Surprisingly, a new faction quickly joined the fray. The Hu faction. The founder of the Hu faction was the 9th disciple of Venerable Trinity. His name was Hu Xiangdi. He had no children, and the young master of the Hu faction was his only disciple. Her name was Lei Linglong, and she was an outstanding beauty. The Hu faction was inclined to suppress Ling Han. At this time, the matter of Ling Han itself was no longer important. This had become a stage for the disciples of Venerable Trinity to display their strength. They were fighting for the right to become the only true disciple, and would trample on the other side. Or rather, they wanted to use this matter to trample on a few people. Ling Han was the fuse, and the Hua faction's participation announced the start of this battle. Following that, even more disciples of Venerable Trinity joined in. Tai Gate, Lang Gate, Nie Gate, Jian Gate, and Lu Gate. 8 of the 9 great disciples were involved, and the current situation just happened to be 4 against 4. Only the Chu faction had not expressed its stance. Who would have thought that a mere mountain river tier disciple could actually trigger an intense battle between the 9 great disciples to display their strength? But the conditions of the Hua faction had also changed. Previously, Ji Yunji had proposed a condition on behalf of the Hua faction, and was willing to spend a large sum of money to purchase a drop of thousand source true fluid. In return, they would help Ling Han resolve the pressure from the Gao faction. But when Tai Men, Nye Men, and Lu Men also joined the alliance, Ji Yunji came to see Ling Han again. I'm really sorry. In order to fight against the alliance of the Lao, Lang, Jian, and Hu sects, young master was forced to get the help of the other three sects, but he couldn't just let them attack for no reason. Ji Yunji smiled apologetically. Young master said that she hopes that senior apprentice brother Han can take out all 4 drops of thousand source true fluid. Seeing Ling Han's complexion darken, she quickly said, of course the young master won't treat senior apprentice brother Han unfairly. You can buy it for 1,000,000 true essence stones per drop. Are you robbing us? Ling Han almost laughed out loud. He had earned over 2,000,000 true origin stones by selling alchemical pills in the Chaotic Star's majestic empire, yet the 1,000 source true fluid could only be sold for 1,000,000 true origin stones. This was a treasure that even heavenly body tier elites would value highly. Your young master really knows how to joke. Ling Han shook his head. He finally understood that whether it was the Hua faction or the Gao faction, there was actually no difference. It was just a dog-eat-dog situation. He actually still held hope in the Hua faction, he was really too naive. Ji Yunji also felt guilty inside, but how could she not carry out the young master's orders? She stretched out a hand to press down on Ling Han's palm, and said, Senior apprentice brother Han, young master Hua will use other methods to compensate you. Ling Han withdrew his hand, and said, junior apprentice sister Ji, please conduct yourself with dignity. I'll also give you a word of advice. Is a man who can send you around like a commodity worth entrusting his entire life to? Ji Yunji's pretty face couldn't help but change color. Hua Yangwen had ordered that she could appropriately sacrifice some of her beauty to pacify Ling Han. She was naturally unwilling, yet did not dare to disobey his orders. Now that she had been exposed by Ling Han, she almost wanted to die from embarrassment and indignation. There is no need for senior apprentice brother Han to worry about my matters, she said coldly. In short, hand over the 1,000 source true fluid, and you can have me. Tua. The old ginseng suddenly popped out. This guy's eyes were already shining with golden light. Hearing such an alluring conversation, how could he possibly resist? He popped out from who knew where. Girl, take off your clothes first, and let Grandpa Ginseng inspect. Scram! Ling Han kicked out, and the old ginseng was instantly sent flying by him. Ah! The old ginseng screamed. Brat, you're burning the bridge after you've outlived your usefulness. You can't even let Grandpa Ginseng have some soup. You can't be so disloyal. You miser, you keep all the good things to yourself. Grandpa Ginseng will cross you. Ji Yunji's face twitched involuntarily. What the hell was this? Ling Han waved his hand, and said, go back, and don't come again in the future. Since young Master Hua is not sincere, then our previous agreement is completely nullified. Senior apprentice brother Han. Ji Yunji revealed a sinister expression. You have already offended the Gao faction. If you offend our Hua faction as well, it will be difficult for you to take a single step in the sect. You speak as if the whole world is run by you people. Ling Han said indifferently. Speak less now. At most, I will only dislike the Hua faction, but if you continue to draw hatred, the Hua faction will also be on my hit list in the future. I can also give you a warning. Being on my hit list, there will definitely not be a good outcome for you. He showed a confident smile. There would come a day when he would surpass the heavenly body tier and reach the eternal river tier. At that time, even if Venerable Trinity moved, he would not be able to stop him from seeking justice from the so-called Gao faction and Hua faction. The Rain Emperor, Feng Peyun, and Ding Ping, which one of them was not a prodigy? As long as they were given enough time, they could even poke a hole in the sky. Don't bully the young for being poor. Ji Yunji couldn't help but be subdued by Ling Han's domineering manner. After a long while, she finally said, since senior apprentice brother Han insists on acting your own way, I will report to young master truthfully. Farewell. She turned to leave. Since they could not see eye to eye, there was naturally nothing more to be said. It would only worsen the relationship between them. Brat, you are really too stupid. There is a girl who is willing to take off her clothes on her own, so why don't you do it? The old ginseng ran back, his face filled with the air of a hoodlum. Ling Han sighed, and said, you have really reincarnated into the wrong body. Since you like people taking off their clothes so much, why don't you go and squat in the bathing pool? He he he, he 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 he. This old ginseng released a series of evil laughter. How do you know that Grandpa Ginseng has not been there before? Fuck, this perverted ginseng. Ling Han shook his head, too lazy to argue with him. Now, he had also pushed the Hua faction out. Then, even if the Hua faction and the others did not side with the Gao faction, there would be as many as 4 factions targeting Ling Han. Now that things had come to this, the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring. Whether Ling Han was guilty or not, they had to nail Ling Han to death. Otherwise, the 4 factions would lose all face. A single Gao faction was enough to pressure Ling Han to the point of suffocation, what more now that there were 4 factions? Chapter 1208. Zhu Tianqiu was shocked. He was only in the mountain river tier, yet his explosive speed was actually above his own. Was this possible? However, he had to believe it even if he didn't. The distance between him and Ling Han not only didn't shrink, but was instead continuously widening. Thankfully, he thought. Previously, it was indeed a very wise decision to have the other person guard Ling Han at the auction venue. Otherwise, the two of them could only sigh behind Ling Han. However, Ling Han knew that he couldn't maintain this kind of speed for long. This was a bit like the ultimate arrow, exploding with terrifying speed for a short period of time, but not as exaggerated as the ultimate arrow. He could maintain this kind of speed for about 15 minutes. And this was under the premise that he hadn't completely grasped the star-plucking step. If he could truly grasp the essence of this movement technique, his explosive speed could be even faster. Not long after, Ling Han's speed decreased, but he had also arrived at the foot of the mountain, and the small town was already in front of him. Just a little bit more. Han Lin, still not stopping. A cold humph sounded, and an elite of the Sun-Moon tier appeared, blocking Ling Han's path like a god. Whether I stop or not, what does it have to do with you? Ling Han's figure flashed, wanting to circle around him. What a joke. You see, am standing guard here, and you want to pass. This Sun-Moon tier cultivator smirked coldly, and made a grab at Ling Han. He was in the late stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, and when this strike was delivered, a sun and moon swayed, exuding a frightening might. This wasn't the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, where there would be restrictions that targeted power above the Sun-Moon tier. Ling Han clenched his fist, and punched out. What, are you courting death? Yu Ci's heart skipped a beat. A mere mountain river tier actually dared to challenge a Sun-Moon tier. Where did this courage come from? He humphed, but restrained some of his power to avoid beating Ling Han to death. As long as he wasn't convicted, Ling Han would remain a seed of the majestic heaven sect. Thus, he could only invite him back for a hearing. If he crippled or even killed Ling Han, he would have to pay a corresponding price. His fist smashed into the huge hand that was descending from above, and a terrifying shockwave immediately arose. Peng, 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 peng. The surrounding rocks were all shattered. Yu Ci revealed an expression of disbelief. Ling Han's punch had actually blocked him. This. The peak of the Lamita realm. You've actually reached the peak of the Lamita realm. He was indescribably shocked. The pinnacle realm was the domain of kings, but even so, not every king could cultivate the pinnacle realm to the peak. This was because this was the pinnacle realm. In this realm, every step forward was extremely difficult. How old was Ling Han? He had already reached the peak of the Lamita realm. Furthermore, reaching the peak of the pinnacle of the Lamita realm meant that one's strength could transcend an entire realm. This brat was now equivalent to the early stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, and though he was in the late stage of the low extreme, he restrained some of his power because he was afraid of smacking Ling Han to death. As a result, their power levels were actually about the same. Hee, it's nothing. No need to worship me so much, Ling Han said with a smile. Humph, so what if it's the peak of the Lamita realm? It's only equivalent to the early stage of the low extreme. I can still easily suppress it. Yu Si said. This was good as well. He could use his full power, and he didn't have to worry about accidentally killing Ling Han and losing his life. He used the power of the sun and moon, divine patterns blossoming all over his body, and unleashed his full battle prowess. Brat, today, I'll let you know that the gap between the Mountain River tier and the Sun-Moon tier is not only in power, but also in the grasp of the Tao of heaven and earth. Hung, he similarly threw a punch. Divine patterns intertwined, forming a terrifying might. Ling Han took it head-on, but was immediately sent flying, blood spurting from all over his body. He gritted his teeth and crawled to his feet. Yu Si was right. The Sun-Moon tier was stronger than the Mountain River tier not only in power, but also in the grasp of the regulations of heaven and earth. He had cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and was theoretically only 2 stars weaker than Yu Si, but added with the regulations of heaven and earth, this gap was extraordinarily large. Why was it said that 10 stars of power could rival the early stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier? That was because this kind of Sun-Moon tier had just stepped into a new domain, and their comprehension of regulations was about the same as the peak stage of the pinnacle level. Obediently follow me back to the sect to be interrogated. Yu Si attacked again. He opened his mouth, and spat out a large brown bird, which flapped its wings and flew towards Ling Han. This was a giant bird, and when it spread its wings, it was 300 meters long. Its whole body was covered with divine patterns, and this was an attack completely formed from the regulations of heaven and earth. Ling Han didn't take it head-on. He had already tried, and the other's battle prowess was indeed above his. Taking it head-on would only be seeking trouble. He used the star-plucking step. Though it no longer possessed extreme speed, it was erratic, making it impossible for Yu Si to lock onto him. Thus, the attack couldn't possibly unleash the power it should have. Yu Si wasn't in a hurry, though. Zhu Tianqiu should be arriving very soon. The latter had cultivation at the peak stage of the low extreme, and to say nothing of teaming up with him, he alone would be enough to take down Ling Han. He only had to keep Ling Han occupied, and not let him go to the auction venue. He was sure that Ling Han wouldn't hand over a treasure like the 1000-source true fluid to the Mo Clan Trading Company in advance, so who could be at ease? True enough, Zhu Tianqiu arrived after a short while. His explosive speed was indeed not as fast as Ling Han's, but he had the advantage in that he had a long endurance. Thus, he only arrived slightly later than Ling Han. Ha ha ha, where are you going? Zhu Tianqiu was a little flushed. A mighty elite of the Sun-Moon tier actually let a Mountain River tier slip away, how humiliating. Ling Han chuckled, and said, all right, I'll follow you guys back to the sect. Instantly, Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si felt as if they had punched empty air. At first, they had wanted to properly deal with Ling Han, but had not imagined that Ling Han would be so decisive. However, since Ling Han couldn't enter the town, he naturally couldn't hand over the 1000-source true fluid to the Mo Clan Trading Company, so they could be considered to have completed their mission perfectly. Then let's go, the two of them said with dark expressions. Ling Han didn't look disappointed at all, which made Yu Si and Zhu Tianqiu very confused. That was because Ling Han's plan had obviously failed, so how could he still be so calm? They couldn't figure it out. The three of them walked towards the main peak. The two elites of the Sun-Moon tier sandwiched Ling Han in the middle, their origin power condensed but not released. They could explode with their strongest attack at any time to prevent Ling Han from escaping. Yet Ling Han didn't plan to escape at all. He smiled, and said, are you guys thinking that I clearly couldn't hand over the 1000-source true fluid to the Mo Clan Trading Company? I've completely failed, so why am I still so calm? Yu Si and Zhu Tianqiu were both startled. This was indeed a question that they didn't understand, but hearing it so easily from Ling Han's mouth, it gave them a very strange feeling. Humph, since you already know that you've completely failed, then obediently hand over the 1000-source true fluid. You have to know that with your abilities, there's no way you can guard so much divine fluid, Yu Si said coldly. Ling Han smiled, and said, Hee, I know that you guys have included my friends and disciple in your surveillance, but in truth, I'm only bait. Now that I've appeared, you guys have all come to chase after me. Hee, that disciple of mine should have already handed it over to the Mo Clan Trading Company. Chapter 1209. What? Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si almost jumped up. Ling Han was actually just bait. Why did they have to deal with Ling Han? Although he had disobeyed the Yan Huang, this was not enough for the Gao faction to spend so much effort to deal with him. The most important thing was still for the 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid. But now, the 1000-source true fluid was actually handed over to the Mo clan establishment for auction. Then, so what if they captured Ling Han? They had been tricked. Don't look like you've eaten a dead child. You should know that the 1000-source true fluid is mine in the first place. You guys are anxious for my things. Hee, should I thank you? Ling Han said with a smile, his tone filled with mockery. Before he went into seclusion, he had handed the 1000-source true fluid and the other auction items to Ding Ping, and he had also predicted that the Gao faction would definitely keep an eye on the people around him. Thus, he used himself as bait, attracting everyone here today. This was very normal. The culprit had appeared, so shouldn't they capture the culprit? You're lying. Zhu Tianqiu shouted. He had already suffered a loss at the hands of Ling Han. If he was tricked by Ling Han again, he would really be unable to raise his head in public. Yes, you definitely want to lure us back to the town, and then take the chance to escape, Yu Si said. Ling Han shrugged, and said, Hee, only a loser would stubbornly think that he hasn't failed. Fine, let's go quickly. This farce should end. I don't want to bear a groundless crime, even if it's just suspicion. Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si exchanged a look. It was already too late to return to the Mo clan establishment now. They could only escort Ling Han back. At least they had completed this task. After a while, they arrived at the White Jade Palace on the main peak. The White Jade was flawless. This was the place where the sect interrogated people. Whether they were black or white would naturally be revealed after the interrogation. Knowing that Ling Han had been brought to justice, a few elites instantly rushed over. They were the main interrogators. There were 5 in total, and they were all at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. Heavenly Body tier elites naturally wouldn't personally interrogate a measly Mountain River tier cultivator. Who would be so free? If even Heavenly Body tier elites were like this, then there was no need to even mention Eternal River tier elites. Venerable Trinity spent almost all of his time cultivating, and rarely came out of seclusion. However, wasn't the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier not enough? Aside from 1 Eternal River tier and 24 Heavenly Body tier elites, this was the strongest force they had. Even in the entire galaxy, this was not a force that could be underestimated. Han Lin, why aren't you kneeling in front of us? Shouted one of the judges. His name was Xin Kuo, and he sat in the middle of the 5 judges. Ling Han said indifferently, this disciple didn't violate any sect rules, so what crime is there to speak of? Moreover, as a seed, there's no need for me to kneel and kowtow to the lords, right? Hee, greetings to the lords. He cupped his fists and nodded at the 5 of them as a sign of respect. What an arrogant person, another judge, Ma Gai, said. His eyes were very narrow, and there was a hint of femininity to them. Young man, the stubborn are easily broken. Those who are too arrogant never have good endings. Oh, are you talking about Yang Hao, my lord? Ling Han asked with a smile. This guy is indeed arrogant. He's clearly at the sun-moon tier, yet he publicly attacked a mountain-river tier cultivator. He ignored the sect rules, and he actually didn't receive any punishment after causing trouble. This is simply illogical. Pooh! The 5 judges almost exploded in anger. You really know how to fucking spout nonsense. Yang Hao was indeed arrogant, but he was a super prodigy that only appeared once in a million years. Moreover, he was more likely to be taken as a disciple by Venerable Trinity, so he had the right to be arrogant. Moreover, Yang Hao had been beaten very badly in the end, and even his life essence had been expelled. He had at least lost a few hundred years of his lifespan. Although a few hundred years wasn't long for elites who were destined to reach the heavenly body tier, it wasn't short either. When their lifespan reached its end, even a few hours would be incredibly precious, let alone a few hundred years. Yang Hao didn't even cry out after suffering such a huge loss, yet Ling Han was still making sarcastic remarks here. Was there still any justice in this world? Han Lin, don't change the topic. Shen Kuo coughed heavily. This time, he was interrogating Ling Han to see if he had committed any crimes, so what was the point of shifting the topic to someone else? He coldly asked, do you know your crimes? What crimes? Ling Han countered with a smile. You slaughtered Shi Ming and the others from the Gao faction in the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, and stole their 1000-source true fluid, Shen Kuo said darkly. He even used the aura of the sun-moon tier to suppress Ling Han. It was a pity that Ling Han's spirit had been tempered by the indestructible Heaven Scroll, so it was stable and tough. Moreover, he had also refined the remnant essence of a demon master. If one wanted to suppress his spirit, they would at least need to be a supreme elite of the Genesis tier. The sun-moon tier wasn't enough. Ling Han stood proudly, and said, what do you mean by good or bad? I've never seen or heard of it. Sophistry. Ma Gui humphed. If you didn't have a guilty conscience, why did you disappear for a few months? I couldn't find you no matter what. Milord, you really like to joke. Isn't it normal for cultivators to cultivate in seclusion? Ling Han said with a smile. Could it be that when Milord is cultivating in seclusion, he would make a special report to the sect? Ma Gui was instantly rendered speechless. Sect disciples could naturally cultivate in seclusion at any time, but the timing of Ling Han's seclusion was too coincidental. No matter what, they were all fleeing to escape punishment. Shen Kuo waved his hand, and said, today is a fair trial to determine whether you are guilty or innocent. Thus, you haven't been tortured yet. The sect definitely won't force you to confess, but they won't allow a real criminal to escape either. Milord is fair, Ling Han said with a smile, but his tone was naturally filled with disbelief. Shen Kuo really wanted to slap this guy to death, but when he thought of the movement techniques of this seed, he could only suppress his urge. Moreover, if it weren't for the fact that Ling Han had come from a small world and had a clean background, how would they dare to treat a seed like this? Which seed didn't have heavenly body tier connections? Situations like Ling Han, the Rain Emperor, and Ding Ping were too unique. 3 seed-level geniuses had actually appeared from the same small world. He calmed his emotions, and said, you are temporarily innocent, but the ownership of the 1000-source true fluid is still a matter of debate. Thus, I want you to hand over the 1000-source true fluid first. If it belongs to you, we will naturally return it to you. In the end, it was still for the 1000-source true fluid. This was very normal. If it was just Ling Han himself, how could he be worthy of the Gao faction making such a move? Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, Milord means that the 1000-source true fluid might have been obtained by that evil sect? Ha, Milord is really good at joking. How could a bunch of weaklings like them possibly obtain the 1000-source true fluid, let alone 4 drops? Oh, that's right. I heard that Yang Hao also obtained 2 drops in the past. If these 4 drops were obtained by some evil sect, doesn't that mean that they're even more powerful than Yang Hao? Weaklings. Shen Kuo and the others all grimaced. They were actually all members of the Gao faction. Although Ling Han hadn't mentioned any names, he had still insulted all of them. A measly cultivator at the mountain river tier was practically pointing at their noses and calling them weaklings. How could they accept this? This person with a sharp tongue. Chapter 12:10. Ling Han waved his hand with a smile, and said, "To be honest, I've already handed the 1000 source true fluid over to the Mo clan establishment for auction, so you can forget about it. If you don't believe me, you can ask around. With my understanding of you, I'm sure someone has already been at the auction venue, and they should have returned to report to me by now. Hurry up and start the trial. Although I'm innocent, I'm also very displeased to be slandered all the time." Shen Kuo, Ma Gai, and the others all wore dark expressions. Did this brat really think that he was here as a guest? He was far too calm and collected. However, if what he said was true, then they were in deep trouble. They walked toward Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si, and the two of them instantly broke out in a cold sweat. If their young master didn't obtain the 1000 source true fluid, they would definitely have to bear heavy responsibility. When they thought of Gao Huang's methods, the two of them paled as if they were suffering from a serious illness. "Han Lin, how dare you?" Shen Kuo said in a stern voice. "The ownership of the 1000 source true fluid is still in dispute, yet you actually sold it in private? Do you still have any respect for the sect?" Ling Han chuckled, and said, "Don't say such nonsense. The 1000 source true fluid is mine, and it's mine no matter what you say. If you don't believe me, you can have all the mountain river tier cultivators in the sect attack me. Can I defeat them all by myself? Such unskilled slander is truly meaningless. Let's talk about Shi Ming and the others. Since you claim that I killed them, do you have witnesses or material evidence? Otherwise, it can't be that they appeared to you in your dreams, right?" Pooh! A few ordinary disciples who were maintaining order outside instantly burst into laughter. However, today wasn't a public trial, so they were very idle, and no one was watching them. Shen Kuo's expression darkened. He had never thought that he would almost explode from anger because of a mountain river tier cultivator. This was simply impossible. Which mountain river tier cultivator dared to talk back to a sun moon tier cultivator? Moreover, even if he was, so what? He could just slap him to death. Could a mountain river tier cultivator overturn the heavens? However, under the current circumstances, he really couldn't make a move. Firstly, he still didn't know whether or not the 1000 source true fluid had actually been auctioned off. If it was hidden by Ling Han, and he killed Ling Han, then he could only wait to be killed by Gao Huang. Secondly, Ling Han was a seed. As long as this identity was not removed, he would not be able to kill him. Because of this, Shen Kuo was naturally angry because he could only endure but not vent his anger. Bam! At this moment, the door of the White Jade Palace was suddenly pushed open. It must have been kicked open. After the door was opened, one could see a person maintaining a kicking posture. It was a young man with a slender figure and an extremely handsome appearance. However, the aura he exuded was incomparably terrifying, causing many people to have difficulty breathing. It was as if someone was strangling their necks. It was extremely uncomfortable. "Greetings, young master." Shen Kuo and the others immediately stood up and bowed respectfully to the newcomer. Meanwhile, the mountain river tier disciples all knelt on the ground. This person was Gao Huang. Ling Han turned around and walked toward this opponent that he had never met before. He wanted to remember this person's appearance so that he wouldn't kill the wrong person when he killed in the future. Gao Huang's expression was ugly. He strode into the palace, humphed coldly, and said, "What the hell are you trash doing? I've received a report that a drop of 1000 source true fluid has already been auctioned off." Since a drop had appeared, it meant that the remaining 3 drops were definitely in the hands of the Mo clan establishment. Shen Kuo and the others all fell silent. Although they were all elites at the Sun Moon tier, they were like weaklings in front of Gao Huang. There was nothing they could do. Gao Huang wasn't any weaker than them, yet his status was much higher. Moreover, he had a father at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier. Who could afford to offend him? Moreover, they were all members of the Gao faction, so how could they dare to disrespect their young master? Gao Huang turned his gaze toward Ling Han, and said, "You, hurry to the auction house and stop the auction." "Oh. Why?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Because this is my command," Gao Huang said proudly. "Idiot." Ling Han snorted. "Why you dare to scold me?" Gao Huang roared in anger. Ling Han shrugged, and said, "If you weren't an idiot, why would you need to take this position? And if you really are an idiot, then I'm only speaking the truth. Speaking the truth counts as scolding someone, so I can only chuckle." Gao Huang instantly flew into a rage. He had never seen someone like Ling Han who could scold someone so boldly and confidently. He humphed, and said, "It's rare to see someone who dares to act so arrogantly in the punishment hall. However, don't forget what kind of place this is. Interrogate them. Do whatever you need to do." Shen Kuo and the others looked at each other. "Aren't we in the middle of the interrogation? It's you who suddenly appeared and interrupted the interrogation, and you're actually blaming us?" However, did they dare to complain? After all, they weren't Ling Han. "Han Lin, no matter how eloquent you are today, you won't be able to escape the punishment of justice." Shen Kuo returned to his seat of honor. He suddenly slammed the table, and said, "Summon the witnesses." After a short while, a few people walked out from the back of the palace. They were all young disciples at the mountain river tier. "Did any of you witness Han Lin killing Shi Ming and the others?" asked Shen Kuo. The mountain river tier disciples nodded respectfully, "Yes, sir." "Han Lin, what do you say?" Shen Kuo asked Ling Han. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said to one of the disciples, "Then let me ask you, what technique and weapon did I use to kill Shi Ming?" The disciple who was being questioned couldn't help but freeze. This wasn't in the script. "What? You saw me kill someone, but you don't even know how I did it?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "What's with that look in your eyes? Don't answer yet." Ling Han waved his hand, and turned to the others. He said, "Since you all saw me kill someone, then tell me all at once. What weapon did I use to kill Shi Ming? Don't rush. I'll count to 3, and you all answer together. 1. 2. Enough." Shen Kuo suddenly shouted. "Han Lin, how long do you want to keep this up?" Ling Han was surprised, and said, "Aren't I proving my own innocence? Moreover, this is a very simple question, isn't it? Since it was my turn to kill someone, I asked them what the murder weapon was. Isn't that a very reasonable thing to do?" "Humph, you're threatening the witness," Shen Kuo said harshly. "Hee, in front of several Sun Moon tier masters, how could I dare to threaten the witness?" "I don't have the ability to do so," Ling Han said calmly. "Then I might as well not say anything. Are you all satisfied like this?" Hee, as expected of a sharp-tongued person. There was a long laugh, and another person appeared at the door. No, it was 2 people, one in front and one behind. The one standing in front was also a handsome youth. His appearance was not inferior to Gao Huang's, and his strength was probably not low either. He also exuded a suffocating aura. Ling Han didn't recognize this person, but when Ling Han saw that the person behind was Ji Yunji, he could guess this person's identity. The young master of the Hua faction, Hua Yangwen. Chapter 12:12. Yang Hao had always had his way. He was born in a heavenly body tier force, and he had displayed astonishing talent in martial art from a young age. He had always been like the sun in the sky, and no matter where he went, he was revered as a prodigy. In his clan, he had high hopes. Among his peers, he was an invincible prodigy, and everyone revered him. Even in the majestic heaven sect, he defeated all the prodigies and outshone them. He was blessed by the heavens, and he was destined to become an overlord. However, he had suffered a huge loss at the hands of Ling Han. Although it wasn't Ling Han who had attacked, he had almost been killed by Empress Yuan Xing, and he had even lost a significant amount of life essence. He would seek revenge from Empress Yuan Xing in the future, but for now, he wanted to kill Ling Han first to collect some interest. Han Lin, killing a fellow disciple is a huge crime, and it's even more despicable, he said coldly. I suggest we tie him up at the entrance of the sect, and cut off a piece of his flesh every day until his blood runs dry, and his life essence runs dry. So ruthless. Everyone said in their hearts. It was difficult for immortals to die. As long as their vitals weren't damaged, it wouldn't matter even if their limbs were severed, or if their blood ran dry. After all, severed limbs could be regenerated, and fresh blood could be regenerated. However, all of this required life essence. Life essence couldn't be touched, but it definitely existed. In fact, there were evil techniques that could absorb life essence and turn it into nourishment for one's own body, which could slightly prolong one's lifespan and boost one's cultivation level. Yang Hao wanted to kill Ling Han by dismembering him, making him suffer until his life essence ran dry. How ruthless. Gao Huang and Hua Yangwen were both on guard. This young 10th uncle was a ruthless person, and they definitely couldn't afford to offend him. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, Yang Hao, you're too useless. You actually need this kind of trash to fight for you. Come, come, come. Suppress your cultivation level, and let's fight. How do I deal with you? Yang Hao sneered, and said, who do you think you are to fight with me? Don't say that I'm bullying you. If we're on the same level, I'll fight you with only one hand and one foot. Ling Han put his left hand behind his back and smiled. How about I fight you with my right hand? He switched to his other hand. Too crazy, really too crazy. Martial Uncle Yang, why don't we capture this brat first and punish him so that he'll behave himself? Gao Huang suggested. Although he was much older than Yang Hao, and his cultivation base was also slightly higher, he was still very humble. It wasn't easy for someone who was used to being arrogant to do this. Yang Hao nodded and said, all right, capture him. He looked at Ling Han. How could such a minor character be qualified to fight against him? What a joke. Ling Han's heart clenched. They were finally going to meet on the battlefield. It was about time for him to enter the Black Tower, and take his revenge another day. Humph. Come on, you haven't learned your lesson yet, and you're still biting indiscriminately. Hu Feiyun appeared with a cold humph. An aura that far surpassed the mountain river tear radiated from her body. It was Empress Yuan Xing. Ling Han frowned upon hearing this. He had already made arrangements for his retreat, yet Empress Yuan Xing's actions could possibly disrupt his plans. After all, if Empress Yuan Xing was in danger, how could he stay in the Black Tower? To say nothing of the various things that had happened between him and Empress Yuan Xing, just the fact that she had attacked him for his sake alone made him feel embarrassed. Yang Hao had never feared anyone in his life, but when it came to Empress Yuan Xing, an expression of fear appeared on his face. He had been beaten to the point of losing his temper, so it was difficult for him not to be traumatized. Pa! The Empress attacked, sending Yang Hao flying with a single slap. Pooh! Yang Hao spat out a mouthful of blood, and his spirit instantly weakened. It was too hurtful. Fortunately, the Empress had held back. Otherwise, if a supreme elite of the heavenly body tier had attacked, Yang Hao might have been able to survive. Ha, sir, this is already the second time, a cold voice said. This was the majestic heaven sect. Two figures appeared at the same time. They both looked to be in their 50s, and there was an aura of primal chaos swirling around their faces. It was an impure appearance, and there were shockingly 4 heavenly bodies behind them. Gao Huang and Hua Yangwen were overjoyed, and they each called out, Father. Venerable Trinity's 2 personal disciples were the 4th disciple, the leader of the Gao faction, Gao Fang, and the 6th disciple, the leader of the Hua faction, Hua Yongning. Both of them were supreme elites at the peak stage of the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. Sir, you've gone too far, Hua Yongning said coldly. This is the majestic heaven sect, not your chaotic star's majestic empire. You want to stop me? Empress Luan Xing said calmly, but there was a supreme domineering tone in her voice. In terms of aura, who could compare to a sovereign? Moreover, Hua Yongning and Gao Feng weren't even sect leaders. They were at the same cultivation level, but in terms of domineering aura, Empress Luan Xing was superior to them. However, Ling Han spoke up and said, Your Imperial Majesty, this is my business, so please don't interfere. He winked at Empress Luan Xing with all his might. It's not like you don't know that I have a spatial god tool, so who could harm your man? However, Empress Luan Xing saw this, and calmly said, He's one of my people. I heard that you wanted to interrogate him, so I'm only here to observe. Observe your sister. Observing would cause Yang Hao to spew blood all over his body, and he would also lose some of his life essence. However, if a heavenly body tier elite wanted to distort the truth, there was really nothing you could do, unless you started fighting. Hua Yongning and Gao Feng both looked apprehensive. They were facing an empress, so they definitely couldn't underestimate her. However, they were only apprehensive. After all, they believed that this was only a divine sense imprint of Empress Luan Xing, so its strength was limited. Fine, if you want to observe, then go ahead. Hua Yongning and Mo Tian both clasped their hands behind their backs. With them keeping an eye on Empress Luan Xing, she wouldn't be able to overturn the heavens and earth. Yang Hao slowly crawled to his feet, his eyes spitting fire. Fuck, then what about me? I was beaten for nothing. Still not going to interrogate? Empress Luan Xing charged at Shen Kuo, images of the sun, moon, and stars surging in her eyes. Her aura was so terrifying that Shen Kuo almost spat blood. His face twitched. Interrogate my ass. Haven't I already stripped Ling Han of his seed status, and expelled him from the sect? He thought for a moment, and could only reiterate the verdict. Pa! He had just finished speaking when he was sent flying by a slap from Empress Luan Xing. He felt as if all the bones in his body had been broken, and he couldn't even crawl to his feet. I don't approve of this result. Retry the trial. Empress Luan Xing said in an extremely domineering manner. You've gone too far. Hua Yongning and Gao Feng finally couldn't tolerate it anymore. Do you really think this is your chaotic star's majestic empire? Ha, little girl, this is the first time you've acted violently in front of me. I won't lower myself to your level, but you can't do it again. The person you just hit is my disciple. A terrifying voice rang out, causing everyone to tremble from the depths of their souls. This was a suppression on the level of life. Venerable Trinity. Chapter 12-13. Who would have thought that the interrogation of a measly mountain river tier cultivator would actually require an eternal river tier elite to appear? Empress Luan Xing's expression involuntarily changed. She was very powerful, yet she hadn't reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier yet, so how could she possibly be a match for an eternal river tier elite? However, her aura wasn't weak either, and she said, Senior, the world is vast, but it's nothing more than reason. These people are in cahoots with each other. They are making up false charges and wronging innocent people. I will not go over. Ha, the matters of the majestic heaven sect are not for a little girl like you to concern yourself with. Venerable Trinity's voice rang out, but he didn't appear. I'm just asking you, why did you injure my disciple? Yang Hao sneered. He had a spiritual sense talisman that Venerable Trinity had given him. As long as he injected his spiritual sense into it, he would be able to contact Venerable Trinity and snitch on him. From this, it could be seen how much Venerable Trinity doted on his new disciple. So what if he was at the heavenly body tier? In front of eternal river tiers, he was nothing more than trash. He dared to hit him, and moreover twice at that. Humph, there was no one who could not pay the price. Empress Wan Xing raised an eyebrow, and said, "Senior, are you trying to bully the weak?" "Little girl, don't try to trick me," Venerable Trinity said. "Kneel down and apologize to my disciple, and I'll spare you this once." This was a great humiliation. Asking a supreme elite of the heavenly body tier to kowtow and apologize to a sun-moon tier cultivator. Putting aside the fact that Empress Wan Xing was a ruler of a region, even an ordinary heavenly body tier elite wouldn't be able to tolerate such humiliation. Empress Wan Xing's expression changed drastically. She hadn't thought that Venerable Trinity would be so protective of his own people. Was this even reasonable? However, the truth was always in the hands of the strong, and the weak could only resign themselves to adversity. Ha ha ha. Empress Wan Xing chuckled coldly. She only needed one of her 9 doppelgangers to reach the heavenly body tier, and with her experience as well as the support of a vast amount of resources, Hu Feiyun would only need 100 years at most to reach the heavenly body tier. At that time, she would be able to advance into the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, and then break through to the eternal river tier. For a king tier like her who had cultivated to perfection in every realm, she had the power to surpass 6 stars as soon as she broke through to the next major realm, which was enough for her to battle Venerable Trinity. According to the information they had gathered, Venerable Trinity should be at the late stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier. But not now. Far from it. "Little girl, are you not convinced?" Venerable Trinity smiled and said, "But there's nothing you can do even if you're not convinced. How, if he hit you, you should hit him back." "But master, he's at the heavenly body tier." "I'm no match for him," Yang Hao said respectfully. "Ha, don't you still have me?" Venerable Trinity said. "Thank you, master." A cold smile instantly appeared on Yang Hao's face. Venerable Trinity had already made himself very clear. He wanted him to return the battle to Empress Wan Xing. Moreover, with Venerable Trinity suppressing him, how could a mere heavenly body tier cultivator resist? No matter how much of a freakish genius a heavenly body tier was, in front of an eternal river tier elite, they were all like infants. Ling Han's expression changed. If Empress Wan Xing had been beaten, even if it was only a clone, this would be a great humiliation. Empress Wan Xing wouldn't be able to tolerate it, and he would be even more unable to tolerate it. "Come," he shouted loudly. So what if Venerable Trinity was present? He was going to use the Black Tower to draw the Empress into it. This was his future wife, so how could he allow her to be humiliated? At first, Empress Wan Xing had only wanted to make a big fuss and win a fair opportunity for Ling Han. Who would have thought that she would lose control and attack Yang Hao? This would draw out Venerable Trinity, making the situation even more dire. She was a decisive person, and she immediately charged toward Ling Han. "Ha, you still want to run?" Venerable Trinity chuckled. Empress Wan Xing's body was instantly restrained, and it was as if she had instantly become a statue. She couldn't move at all. Meanwhile, Yang Hao walked over with a cold smile. He raised his hand high into the air, wanting to slap Empress Wan Xing. When he thought about how he would be able to personally take revenge so soon, he couldn't help but feel elated. Of course, this was only a clone of Empress Wan Xing. If he had seen Empress Wan Xing's true appearance, he probably wouldn't have been so ruthless. However, with Empress Wan Xing's pride, she naturally disdained using her appearance to gain sympathy. Shua! Yang Hao lashed out at Empress Wan Xing. A figure flashed past, and pa! There was a crisp sound. Ling Han was sent flying. He activated the star-plucking step and appeared in front of Yang Hao in time, taking the blow for Empress Wan Xing. Although his physique was powerful, that was only at a certain cultivation level. Yang Hao was at the high extreme of the sun-moon tier, and his palm strike had broken Ling Han's godly bones. Moreover, he had broken more than one of them. Wah! Ling Han spat out a mouthful of blood. He had suffered a full power strike from a cultivator at the high extreme of the sun-moon tier. His vision darkened, and he could faint or even die at any moment. Death had never been so close to him. He forced himself to focus, and refined a drop of indestructible true fluid. Instantly, his body recovered. Venerable Trinity murmured in surprise. He was slightly surprised by Ling Han's astonishing recovery ability. Although Ling Han's pounce and block had also been spectacular, that was only because Venerable Trinity hadn't paid any attention to him. Otherwise, Ling Han wouldn't have been able to perform so well. Meanwhile, Yang Hao's eyes widened. Ling Han had taken a full power strike from him, yet he still hadn't died? So what? That strike had almost killed Ling Han just then. Wouldn't another strike be enough? How could he still be alive and kicking? This guy had to have consumed some kind of natural treasure long ago, which was why he could instantly recover. He chuckled coldly, and his gaze landed on Empress Xing again. She had been suppressed by Venerable Trinity, and couldn't resist at all. What pleasure could there be in beating a mountain river tier cultivator? If he wanted to slap someone, he would slap a heavenly body tier cultivator. Only then would it be loud and satisfying. Moreover, she had beaten him to the point of vomiting blood and losing his life essence twice. This was a great enmity. He raised his palm, and once again lashed out at Empress Xing. He knew that Ling Han would definitely pounce over to block again, but he didn't care. Toying with him like this was extremely satisfying. Pang! Sure enough, Ling Han used the star-plucking step to block again, and he was once again sent flying. Blood sprayed from all over his body, and his godly bones broke a few more times. This palm strike was even more ferocious. Not only did Yang Hao use the power of the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, but he also used the regulations of heaven and earth of this level. Hundreds of divine patterns appeared, intertwining to form a terrifying killing intent. Ling Han's aura was extremely weak, and he hadn't been killed by this palm strike because his physique was powerful enough. After all, even a cultivator at the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier couldn't shatter level 5 godly metal with a single strike. All of you deserve to die. Empress Xing said in a stern voice. There was a shocking killing intent in her eyes. When an empress was enraged, heaven and earth would lose color. Her body loosened slightly, and it was as if she were about to break free from Venerable Trinity's control. Little girl, you're far too naive, Venerable Trinity said with a chuckle. The pressure instantly increased explosively, and Empress Xing couldn't even move a finger. Chapter 12-14. Ling Han refined another drop of indestructible true fluid, and his injuries were immediately brought under control. In fact, they were even starting to improve. However, after using 2 drops of indestructible true fluid in such a short period of time, the effects instantly plummeted. The second drop of indestructible true fluid couldn't completely heal his injuries. Instead, it only brought them under control and made them much better. However, they were still some distance away from being completely healed. Even so, this kind of recovery ability still left everyone dumbfounded. It was too shocking. Venerable Trinity's interest was piqued, and he said, "Young man, you're not simple." His standards were extremely high, so someone who could receive praise from him was definitely not simple. Yang Hao couldn't help but feel jealous. He was afraid that Venerable Trinity had also fallen for Ling Han's talent and wanted to take him as his disciple. If that happened, not only would he not be able to take revenge, but he would also gain a powerful enemy. This made him feel very uneasy. Sure enough, Venerable Trinity continued, "Young man, are you willing to take me as your master?" If he had asked Ling Han whether he was willing to take him as his master right from the start, perhaps Ling Han would have responded politely. Even if he didn't sincerely take him as his master, he would at least use this as an excuse to tide over this difficult situation. However, Venerable Trinity had restrained Empress Xing and allowed Yang Hao to beat her up. This was something that Ling Han couldn't accept. He had beaten up his future wife, yet he still wanted him to take him as his master. And Yang Hao wanted to become his senior brother. What kind of joke was this? Ling Han chuckled, and said, "A teacher must have virtue. do you think you have the virtue to be a teacher? Instantly, the surroundings fell silent. Is there something wrong with my ears? Why do I seem to have heard this brat reprimanding Venerable Trinity? Gasp! How audacious! There's actually someone in this galaxy who dares to ask Venerable Trinity if he has virtue in front of him? Is this a joke? How dare you! Hua Yongning and Gao Feng shouted in unison. They had originally disdained to show their might to a mountain river tier cultivator, but this mountain river tier cultivator had insulted their master. As such, they had to step in. Meanwhile, Yang Hao breathed a sigh of relief. In this way, no matter how talented Ling Han was, he wouldn't be accepted as Venerable Trinity's disciple. He couldn't help but think to himself that Ling Han was stupid. A man should know when to yield and when to stand tall. Before he had enough strength, he was trying to show off his might. If this wasn't courting death, then what was? He was afraid that Venerable Trinity would cherish his talent, so he was the first to rush out and attack Ling Han. He shouted, "You dare to insult my master? You're courting death." He struck out with his palm, which was covered in interweaving divine patterns. This was an attack with all his strength. Kill Ling Han and put an end to all future troubles. Multiple illusory images of giant snakes appeared behind Empress Yuan Xing. Each of them was tens of thousands of meters tall, and they exuded an ancient and desolate aura. As soon as the snake appeared, Venerable Trinity's restriction on her disappeared. She stretched out her hand and slapped at Yang Hao. Not good. Hua Yongning and Gao Feng hurriedly moved. If they allowed Yang Hao to be killed by Empress Yuan Xing in front of them, they would definitely suffer a terrible fate. Not only would they have to pay with their lives, but they would also definitely lose Venerable Trinity's favor. At that time, they would no longer have any chance of obtaining the true inheritance of Venerable Trinity. This was something they absolutely could not tolerate. The two heavenly body tier elites moved to intercept Empress Yuan Xing. Although they were late, they managed to block Yang Hao's attack in time because they were closer to him. Boom! The three elites clashed. Peng, 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 peng. A powerful gust of wind swept out, forming a terrifying shockwave that instantly shattered the palace hall. Peng! Because Yang Hao was closer, he was instantly sent flying by the shockwave. Pa, pa, pa! Several of his bones were broken. Fortunately, if it weren't for the fact that this was only a shockwave, he would definitely have died. Hua Yongning and Gao Feng were both astonished. They were clearly all at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, so why was there such a huge gap between them? Even when they teamed up, they were almost no match for her. They could conclude that she hadn't reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. So, why was she so powerful? One had to realize that this was only a divine sense imprint of hers. How powerful would her true body be? Huh? Young lady, you're from the 9 snake tribe. Xiao. A figure descended from the sky. His entire body was enshrouded in divine light, and it was unclear how tall he was. However, the aura he exuded was incredibly terrifying. Venerable Trinity. This eternal river tier elite had actually appeared. One had to realize that he had only casually attacked from afar, and he had already suppressed Empress Yuan Xing. Although she had broken free, he would only need to unleash another attack. However, he had appeared in person. There could only be one reason for this. He had discovered that Empress Yuan Xing's identity in the 9 snake tribe was far too astonishing. Who would have thought that I would be able to meet an ancient divine tribe member in my lifetime? Venerable Trinity said excitedly. His eyes were fixed on Empress Yuan Xing, and it was as if flowers had sprouted from her face. Empress Yuan Xing's expression froze. Although she had unleashed the power of the 9 snake tribe and broken free from Venerable Trinity's control, he had only unleashed a casual attack from afar. He hadn't used his full power at all. There was a vast gulf between the heavenly body tier and the eternal river tier. Even her 9 snake tribe bloodline couldn't bridge this gulf. Moreover, she hadn't reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, and this was only a clone of hers. She couldn't defeat him head-on. So what? She asked calmly as she moved closer to Ling Han. If Venerable Trinity attacked again, she could hide in the Black Tower with Ling Han. Ancient Divine Tribe. Ha, ha ha ha. Venerable Trinity roared with laughter, appearing incredibly excited. In fact, the divine light around his body had even faded, revealing a skinny old man. Being able to make the strongest elite of this galaxy lose his composure like this, it was clear how excited he was at this moment. However, the more excited Venerable Trinity was, the more apprehensive Ling Han and Empress Wanxing felt. This meant that Venerable Trinity was extremely attentive. Moss. Master. Yang Hao slowly woke up, and struggled to his feet. Although a few of his bones were broken, he could still walk normally with his origin power. In fact, he could still fight, but it would definitely affect his battle prowess. Venerable Trinity ignored him, and only stared at Empress Wanxing, saying, "Young lady, I'll take your bloodline." Sure enough, the old man had been infected by Empress Wanxing's bloodline. Although he didn't know how he had taken it, this was definitely not good news for Empress Wanxing. Let's go. Ling Han pounced over, wanting to draw Empress Wanxing into the Black Tower. Young man, wait at the side. Venerable Trinity didn't even need to move. His divine sense was enough to completely imprison Ling Han. Then, he stretched out a hand and grabbed at Empress Wanxing. Yang Hao was also filled with rage. Since Venerable Trinity had taken Empress Wanxing, he would vent his anger on Ling Han. Die! He pounced, and his fist shot toward Ling Han's head. Ling Han. A voice suddenly traveled over. It was so far away that it seemed to come from the other side of the sky. Ling Han. However, the voice was right next to him. Pang! A figure crashed down from the sky. No one knew how she had appeared, but coincidentally, she landed on Yang Hao's body. She stomped him into the ground, creating a human-shaped crater. Ling Han, Niu Fei is here, the figure called out cheerfully. Chapter 12-16. Didn't they say that Ling Han was a bumpkin who came from the small world? However, the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire had stood up for him, and she had even dared to defy Venerable Trinity. This was still acceptable to everyone. Moreover, Empress Wanxing had also been suppressed by Venerable Trinity. There was no doubt about it. However, this mysterious little girl who had descended from the sky was far too ridiculous. Two ultimate elites at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier had been insta-killed with a single strike. If he wasn't an eternal river tier elite, who would believe him? Ling Han actually had such a strong backup by his side. Even Empress Wanxing's heart was pounding. She hadn't imagined that there would be such a terrifying being by Ling Han's side. Although the Notionless Saint was a Genesis tier elite, he had already been dead for who knew how many years, and he had even severed his own saintly might. Right now, he was nothing more than a super tonic that couldn't be of any use in battle. This young girl was obviously very attached to Ling Han. She was completely unreasonable. She only needed one person to be gentle to her even if she had to slaughter everyone in the world. With such a stubborn infatuation, he would definitely be extremely jealous. Perhaps he would even kill himself. Empress Wanxing was skeptical. This was definitely not impossible. Even Ling Han was shocked. He knew that the Rock Palace was an extremely awesome place that could easily break open a small world and come down. This was something that many great sects could not do. If Hu Niu went there, she would definitely advance rapidly. One must know that his cultivation speed was not slow either. No, it wasn't that he wasn't slow. Rather, he was astonishingly fast. In this galaxy, who else could reach the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier before the age of 30? He was certain that the Rock Palace wouldn't let Hu Niu run around by herself, and that the old woman in Cyan would definitely protect her in secret. That old woman was terrifyingly powerful, so they were at ease to let Hunyo run around. However, he had never imagined that Hunyo would actually be this powerful. She had killed even elites at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier just like that. This kind of cultivation speed was really so fast that he had no friends. Even he had to admit that he was far inferior to her. In front of Hunyo, could he still be called a genius? He was definitely an idiot, and a super idiot at that. Ling Han isn't an idiot. Hunyo seemed to know what Ling Han was thinking. She hugged Ling Han, kissed him on the cheek, and said, "Nyo will make Ling Han super powerful." Everyone was speechless. Just a moment ago, this little girl was like a god of death, but now she was like a helpless little bird. No one could believe that they were the same person. However, everyone was even more jealous of Ling Han's luck. What kind of person was this guy? He managed to seduce such a beautiful and shockingly powerful expert. Moreover, this expert was a little girl who could be slowly trained. Just thinking about it made people's noses bleed. Poor Yang Hao. He staggered to his feet. Previously, he had been knocked unconscious by Hunyo's stomp, so he still didn't know what had happened. He only felt that he had been greatly wronged. Today, he had actually been knocked unconscious twice. He was the #1 prodigy of the Majestic Heaven sect, and furthermore, he had just been accepted as a disciple by an Eternal River tier elite, yet he had suffered such a direct blow to the head. How could he accept this? Boom! Yang Hao's black hair soared into the sky. He was truly enraged, and there were flames burning all around his body. This was a manifestation of his rage taking physical form, and his eyes were fixed on Hunyo. Apart from her, there was no other outsider present. It was clear that she had used some kind of technique to knock him unconscious. He didn't know what it was, but he was unafraid. After all, this was the Majestic Heaven sect. In his fury, he didn't notice that 2 of his senior brothers had already died. Meanwhile, Gao Huang and Hua Yangwen were still wailing and throwing up blood. Right now, there was only one thought in his mind: revenge. Holy shit! Did everyone think that he was a pushover? How, Venerable Trinity finally said. There was a strong sense of caution in his voice. Ling Han was able to kill 2 of his disciples with a single strike. Moreover, he hadn't even been able to determine her exact strength. This caused him to feel apprehensive. Ling Han's cultivation level and strength weren't inferior to his. However, she was far too young. Venerable Trinity didn't think that Hunyo could defeat him. What made him feel more apprehensive was Hunyo's background. Being able to nurture such a young Eternal River tier elite. Didn't her sect or clan have to be at the Genesis tier? If a saint was enraged, they could annihilate an entire galaxy with a wave of their hand. Eternal River tier elites were far from enough, let alone Venerable Trinity, who was only at the low extreme of the Eternal River tier. The gap between him and a small saint was enormous. Thus, he decided to swallow his anger. Master. Yang Hao felt aggrieved. Why did Venerable Trinity have to stop him? Didn't he see that his handsome face had been trampled into dust? Moreover, how humiliating was it to be trampled into the soil? The people in the surroundings shook their heads furiously. Yang Hao couldn't afford to oppose Ling Han anymore. This guy was a bringer of misfortune. 2 heavenly body tier elites had already died because of him, and there were 2 more at the consummate level of the Sun Moon tier. It was clear that they wouldn't be able to survive either. If you provoked such a bringer of misfortune, you would definitely be crushed to death. You were merely a disciple of Venerable Trinity. Meanwhile, Ling Han was the lover and man of an Eternal River tier elite. How could you compare to him? Although Yang Hao was infuriated, he didn't dare to disobey Venerable Trinity's orders. He immediately suppressed his anger and stood by his side. However, even if he endured and felt aggrieved, how could Hunyo give up? She actually dared to interrogate her Ling Han. Everyone here deserved to die. Her eyes swept over Empress Xing, and there was a similarly murderous look in her eyes. Damn it! She had just captured those bewitching beasts, and now another one had appeared. Fortunately, this bewitching beast was far less beautiful than Niu. She felt much more at ease. She hadn't seen Empress Xing's true appearance yet. Otherwise, she wouldn't have felt so at ease. You dare to be jealous of Niu's Linghan? Hu Niu decided to start with someone who had committed the most heinous crimes. Thus, she set her sights on Yang Hao, and said, Niu will destroy you. Yang Hao felt that this was hilarious. How great could a little girl who kept mentioning the word, Niu, be? She was like a spoiled young mistress who had just come out into the world. However, this spoiled young mistress was far too good. Yang Hao felt that all the beauties he had seen in his life combined could barely compare to this spoiled young girl. His anger was rapidly dissipating. Hu Niu attacked. Boom! It was as if the sky had collapsed, and countless meteors fell from the sky. The sky was burning with flames, and the main peak was trembling. It was a scene of destruction. Yang Hao was instantly scared shitless. What fucking cultivation level was this? With a single attack, heaven and earth seemed to collapse, and the universe seemed to be destroyed. Stop! Venerable Trinity finally attacked. His two disciples had been killed just then, and he hadn't had the time to attack. After all, even he hadn't expected that Hu Niu would be so powerful. However, Yang Hao was his new disciple, and he had high hopes for him. He definitely couldn't die. An eternal river tier elite attacked. Wang! A silver river surged out from his body, and it was as if it could connect the past and present, elevating his aura to the extreme. Pa! 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 Everyone in the majestic heaven sect collapsed onto the ground. This aura was far too terrifying, and it formed a suppression of life. Meanwhile, this silver river enveloped Yang Hao, forming the strongest defense in the world. Was even more refreshing. Chapter 12-17. The Milky Way coiled around his body, and there were countless large stars floating within it. An eternal river tier could crush a heavenly body tier, and this was not just a saying. Just by looking at this galaxy, it was clear. There were innumerable great stars, so in terms of power, they naturally could crush a heavenly body tier who knew how many streets. Yang Hao immediately calmed down. With his master taking action, no matter who it was, it would be useless. Wanting to kill him was a joke. However, he was simply too curious. Just who exactly was this young woman? She was simply too powerful for Venerable Trinity to personally act to protect her. He was so young, yet he was already so powerful. If he could marry him, he couldn't help but feel a fire burning in his heart, turning into endless greed. How could he not be moved by her beauty and strength? But just at this moment, Hu Niu casually threw out a punch. Pa! The whole galaxy instantly shattered, and all the great stars exploded. Hung, 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 brilliant light soared into the sky. What? Yang Hao's lust immediately turned into boundless fear. Venerable Trinity had stepped in to protect him, but his opponent had shattered the Ganges River with a casual punch. This was not a match for him at all. The girl's strength was already like a legend. Hu Niu stretched out her hand and picked Yang Hao up. She tilted her head to look at him, and asked curiously, "You're so ugly, yet you still dare to oppose Niu's Ling Han. What an idiot!" Pa! Venerable Trinity fell to the ground on his buttocks. Under the impact of the powerful force, a fissure suddenly appeared on the already tottering main peak, and the fissure extended all the way to the top and the foot of the mountain. Boom! The entire main peak collapsed. This was far too terrifying. Hu Niu hadn't targeted him at all. She had merely punched through his defenses, yet the recoil was so powerful that Venerable Trinity couldn't control himself. He sat down on the ground and shattered a mountain peak. Rumble. The heavens fell and the earth collapsed. However, the people nearby were like stone statues. No matter how the flying stones struck them, none of them felt anything. They were immersed in incomparable shock. In the beginning, everyone thought that Hunyeo was at the peak stage of the sun-moon tier, which was why she was able to knock Yang Hao unconscious with a single stomp. However, when she easily defeated Gao Huang and Hua Yangwen, everyone guessed that she had already advanced to the heavenly body tier. However, Hunyeo had killed 2 elites at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier with a single strike, so everyone's evaluation of her naturally rose to another level. They all thought that she was at the eternal river tier. But how could this be her true strength? Venerable Trinity fell to the ground with a single punch. He didn't even try to target Venerable Trinity. This was a complete one-sided slaughter. Medium extreme, high extreme, or even consummate level of the eternal river tier, Genesis tier. Genesis tier. Venerable Trinity muttered in a daze. He had seen a battle between a demon master and a saint in the two-realm battlefield, and that was definitely a power that could destroy the world. The sages had the power of creation, while the demon masters had the power of destruction. There was no difference in quality between the two powers. It all depended on who had a deeper grasp of it. Puff! Everyone was so shocked that their scalps went numb. This girl was actually a saint. The strongest in the world, undefeatable. Damn, Master! Esteemed Lord! Numerous figures flew over. These were the heavenly body tier elites of the majestic heaven sect. This battle was so intense, so if they still couldn't react, then they couldn't be called heavenly body tier elites. But when they arrived, they were all dumbfounded. What the hell? Venerable Trinity sat down on the ground. His hair was disheveled, and he no longer had the air of an immortal. Who could force an eternal river tier elite into such a miserable state? What's going on? Someone asked in shock. This was also what everyone wanted to know. They didn't dare to ask Venerable Trinity, but they could capture the others and interrogate them. After learning the truth, their faces all paled. If it weren't for the fact that Venerable Trinity was still sitting on the ground, they really wouldn't have believed that there was someone in this galaxy who could defeat Venerable Trinity. How could a Genesis tier saint only have this girl? Her blood and chi were as vigorous as the sea, so she definitely couldn't be any younger. She had to be under 100 years old. However, the majority of super prodigies were only at the mountain river tier when they were 100 years old. Advancing to the sun-moon tier was already considered extremely rare, so what kind of concept was a Genesis tier saint at this age? Pa. With Hunyo's style, she naturally wouldn't care about others. She continuously slapped Yang Hao, and in an instant, his face swelled up like a pig's head. She couldn't help but giggle, and said, Ling Han, doesn't this guy look much more handsome now? Ling Han laughed, and said, that's right. This is more pleasing to the eye. Hearing Ling Han's praise, Hunyo instantly broke into a smile. She was overjoyed, and proudly said, of course. Nyo's craftsmanship is incredible. Although Yang Hao had been slapped, he hadn't fainted. He looked at Ling Han, and then at Hunyo, and felt that the heavens really knew how to play tricks on people. How could Ling Han have such a powerful backer? If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have dared to attack Ling Han, even if he had a saint tool. Ling Han had a saint backing him. He hated him. How was he inferior to Ling Han? His talent wasn't weak, and his looks were outstanding. Why was such a beautiful, enchanting, and incredibly powerful girl so attached to Ling Han? I was wrong, he said through gritted teeth. A true man knew when to yield and when to stand tall. As long as he survived this tribulation, he would definitely grit his teeth and cultivate diligently. When he reached the Genesis tier in the future, he would seek revenge for what he had done today. He could be considered a person with a firm will. Otherwise, who would dare to think of seeking revenge against a saint? Just the thought of it would make one shudder in fear. Of course you're wrong, so go and die. Hunyo smiled, and with a flick of her hand, Xiao, Yang Hao was tossed out by her. Peng, a shooting star exploded in the sky, turning into a boundless rain of stars. She had tossed him into the galaxy, where he crashed into a shooting star. Even this shooting star had shattered, so it was easy to imagine Yang Hao's fate. He would definitely be smashed into smithereens, and not even a scrap would remain. This was the might of a Genesis tear. In the eyes of the spectators, this was like a fantasy. "And you, old geezer," Hunyao said. She stretched out a hand to grab Venerable Trinity. "Pa!" She grabbed Venerable Trinity's neck, and under the terrifying might of her grip, what could an eternal river tear do? He was completely powerless to resist. Only at this moment did everyone truly believe that Hunyao was indeed a Genesis tear. Otherwise, how could she have possessed such strength? To hell with such a young saint. Who are you? Venerable Trinity didn't beg for mercy. How could a Genesis tear be influenced by others? He only wanted to know who he had provoked. "Niao is Ling Han's Hunyao." Hunyao tilted her head, and said, "Why are you so stupid, old geezer?" No wonder you dared to harm Niao's Ling Han. So you're an idiot. Pa. Hunyao began to slap Venerable Trinity. "Detestable old geezer. You actually dared to harm Niao's Ling Han. Thankfully, nothing has happened to Ling Han. Otherwise, Niao would be angry." Everyone was speechless. "You've already destroyed the majestic heaven sect, and you're still not angry? Then what do you look like when you're angry?" Of course, no one dared to ask. What a joke. She was a Genesis tier saint. "I'm done." Hunyao casually tossed Venerable Trinity aside. She then threw a punch. Pa! Venerable Trinity instantly exploded into pieces. There wasn't even a single bone left. The young girl smiled sweetly. She was pure and innocent, and as beautiful as water. Who else wants to harm Niao's Ling Han? Chapter 12-18. Hunyao's gaze swept by, and everyone knelt down, not daring to meet her gaze. They knelt with peace of mind. This was a saint. "Little girl, that's enough. Follow me back to the palace." The old woman in cyan appeared. No one noticed how she had appeared. She just stood there very suddenly and naturally, as if she should have been there all along, and no one had noticed. The old woman's aura was not obvious, and she was as ordinary as a normal person. Ling Han knew that this old woman definitely wouldn't let Hunyao appear alone. But what shocked him was that Hunyao had clearly reached the Genesis tier, so why was the old woman still worried? How powerful was the enemy of the Rock Palace that even a saint had to protect her when she was traveling? Could it be that Hunyao was only a small saint now, and the enemy was a saint king? No. Hunyao raised her head like a rattle drum, and leaped over to hug Ling Han tightly. Niao doesn't want to leave Ling Han again. No. The old woman in cyan knocked the cane in her hand heavily. If you stay here, not only will it be dangerous for yourself, but you will also drag this brat down. The old woman finally understood that it was useless to just persuade Hunyao, and she had to include Ling Han as well. Hunyao instantly showed a serious expression, no longer acting shamelessly. Everyone was shocked. From the old woman's tone, it sounded like even Genesis tears couldn't protect themselves. You know too much. The old woman in cyan revealed a fierce glint, and lightly waved her left hand. Pa! The people around them were all blasted into a rain of blood. Ling Han reacted quickly, and hurriedly drew Empress Luan Xing into the Black Tower. At this time, he really couldn't worry about whether the secret of the Black Tower would be exposed. However, saints could create worlds, open up real space, and create spatial god tools. This shouldn't make the old woman jealous, right? As expected, the old woman in cyan only stared at Ling Han, and said, "Brat, shut your mouth, and don't speak nonsense." This old woman was really cruel and merciless. Hunyo's attack could be said to be avenging Ling Han, but for the sake of secrecy, she casually killed over 20 heavenly body tier elites here. She was the one who had let it slip. In fact, it couldn't be said that she had let it slip because she hadn't revealed any secrets at all. These people died too unjustly. Ugly old woman, you dare to threaten Nyo's Ling Han, Nyo is going to banish you to the border to do hard labor. Hunyo was furious, and pointed her halberd at the old woman in cyan as she flipped out. The green-clothed old woman was helpless. Who asked this little ancestor to be the successor of the Rock Palace? She thought for a moment and said, I'll give you 3 days. After 3 days, you must return with me. Hunyo's eyes turned, and she said, okay. Then she waved her hands. Ugly old woman, leave quickly, you're making me annoyed. The azure-robed old woman snorted, turned around, took a step, and disappeared. At this time, more figures came from afar. Some were flying in the sky, and some were running on the ground. Those were the experts participating in the auction. The commotion here was too great, so they had all put down their auctions and rushed over to check on the situation. Let's go. Hunyo pulled Ling Han. Xiao, they instantly traveled hundreds of millions of kilometers, and disappeared without a trace. When everyone rushed over, they found that this place had already been reduced to ruins. They could faintly sense that the blood here was filled with a powerful aura, so much so that they didn't dare to approach. This made them think of a terrifying possibility, but they didn't dare to believe it no matter what. In this galaxy, could there be anyone who could threaten Venerable Trinity? But the majestic heaven sect had been destroyed, and there were cries of agony everywhere, so where had Venerable Trinity run off to? This became an unsolved mystery. Even tens of millions of years later, no one would know what had happened on this day. Ling Han, did you miss Nyo? Ling Han and Hunyo sat on a rock that looked out at the sea in the distance. The young girl leaned into Ling Han's arms, her face filled with longing. Of course I did. Ling Han smiled, and said, I was thinking that I would start looking for you when I reached the Sun-Moon tier. I didn't think that you would find me first. Hunyo instantly giggled, and said, you won't be able to find Nyo. Why not? Ling Han asked. Hunyo thought for a moment, and said, because Nyo is in the celestial realm, and you can't go there yet. What kind of place is the celestial realm? Ling Han asked. Ahem. The old woman in cyan silently appeared, and said, little girl, if you say too much, you will only harm this brat. Fuck, Yin spirits are not bad. Hunyo pouted, and said, I know. She inched closer to Ling Han, and said in a low voice, Ling Han, let's make monkeys. Pooh. Ling Han instantly spluttered, and the old woman in cyan was also furious. She said, little girl, if you continue like this, I will kill this brat. You guys are really no fun, just joking. Hunyo humphed. However, both Ling Han and the old woman in cyan were sure that this girl was definitely not joking. She was completely capable of doing it. Ling Han thought for a moment, and said, let's go back first, or else everyone will be worried. It's all your fault, stupid old woman. Hunyo said in displeasure. She had wanted to take the chance to push Ling Han down and give birth to a son that was even more adorable than Ling Jianshui. Unexpectedly, the stupid old woman didn't keep her word, and had been following them in secret. The old woman in cyan humphed coldly. She had to admit that it was not easy for Ling Han to cultivate to his current cultivation level in such a short time, but to say that he was worthy of the palace mistress of the Rock Palace, he was really too far off. Completely, not the slightest possibility, Ling Han and Hunyo went to the Mo clan establishment. Ling Han, Shui Yenyu and the others immediately came out to greet them. They had all heard about the major event that had just happened in the majestic heaven sect, and were naturally worried about Ling Han. Now that they saw that he was fine, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. Shui Yenyu wanted to throw herself into Ling Han's arms, but she had just pounced when she was picked up by Hunyo, who said murderously, Ling Han, this bewitching woman wants to assassinate you, so Niu will kill her for you. Nonsense. Ling Han hurriedly shook his head. This little girl's jealousy was still as strong as before. Hu Niu couldn't help but pout, her eyes darting around. When she left, she definitely had to take this bewitching woman with her, so how could she feel at ease staying by Ling Han's side? Hu Niu. Feng Peyun, Mu Rongqing, and Helian Tianyun all exclaimed in surprise. They had seen Hu Niu leave with their own eyes, and had not thought that she would suddenly appear. Hu Niu was cold and indifferent. In her eyes, there was only Ling Han, and she did not take anyone else to heart. So she's Hu Niu. Ding Ping was surprised. He had heard his master and several senior uncles mention Hu Niu before. Wow, what a beautiful girl. The old ginseng had also run over long ago, and when he saw Hu Niu, he couldn't help but drool. This girl was really too beautiful. His lust had reached the sky, and he immediately pounced on Hu Niu, saying, "Little girl, let Grandpa Ginseng check how your development is." Chapter 12-20. Who would have thought that the once invincible majestic heaven sect would collapse in a single day? Venerable Trinity had disappeared, and so had the 24 heavenly body tier elites. It was hard to believe that they weren't dead. Although the majestic heaven sect said that they didn't want to be the overlord, the presence of an eternal river tier elite would naturally affect the entire galaxy. Now that all the elites of the majestic heaven sect had disappeared in a single day, this would naturally cause chaos in the galaxy. A long-awaited super war would erupt, and even planets would invade other planets, not just one continent. However, in such a war, true elites would also stand out. How could a supreme prodigy emerge from a pool of stagnant water? The original disciples of the majestic heaven sect naturally all returned to their respective sects, and went to find their mothers. Ling Han temporarily stayed on the flying cloud planet. The Mo clan was using all kinds of connections to help him search for the whereabouts of the 5 sects, but this needed time. However, Ling Han had to first break through to the Sun-Moon tier before he could set out. Thus, there was no need for him to rush. Hu Niu told Ling Han some secrets of martial art, such as the use of mountains and rivers, the sun and moon, and the stars. These weren't just used to store power, but could also be used to suppress opponents. In fact, they could even form their own world. For example, releasing mountains and rivers could trap opponents in this area, and the sun, moon, and stars would undoubtedly be more powerful. The level of martial art in this galaxy was too low, so the development of the treasuries of cultivators was naturally very backward. Otherwise, this would be impossible in a higher-level galaxy. So, my battle prowess can still increase a lot, Ling Han muttered. After suppressing his cultivation level, he battled with Ding Ping, Feng Peyun, and the others. Everyone's cultivation level was the same, but after Ling Han released his mountain and river domain and suppressed them, his battle prowess instantly soared. Because it was equivalent to fighting in his own world, every movement was naturally within his grasp, and he could also endlessly influence his opponents. Now, even if millions of mountain river tier elites ganged up on me, I could still divide them and defeat them one by one. In terms of developing one's own potential, this galaxy is practically still in the primitive stage. However, Venerable Trinity has clearly released the Ganges River to form a silver river to protect Yang Hao. Presumably, he learned this secret art while fighting in the two-realm battlefield. But he didn't teach it to his inner disciples. Perhaps only his true disciples can inherit this secret technique. Ling Han was not the kind of person to keep his secrets to himself. Although he was not generous enough to pass on this secret technique to everyone, Feng Peyun, Mu Rongqing, Ding Ping, and the others had all received his selfless teachings. Moreover, Hu Feiyun had naturally also been taught this technique. Since she knew it, that meant that Empress Luan Xing had also learned it. As for whether the Empress would teach it to others or not, Ling Han didn't care either. This was just a trick to use the mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and the stars. It was not a secret. Several days later, the chaotic star's majestic empire sent a starship to receive the cultivators of their empire. Hu Feiyun, Li Weiwei, and the others all set off on their way back. At first, Ling Han had wanted to kill Zhao Luan, but this guy had actually slipped away quickly, and had already returned to the joint peace planet on a merchant ship. Feng Peyun, Mu Rongqing, and the others didn't return to the joint peace planet. They wanted to search for the 5 sects with Ling Han. They had all come from a small world, so they naturally wouldn't forget the sins that the 5 sects had committed. Everyone was cultivating with all their might. Once they found out the galaxy where the 5 sects were, they would rush over. At that time, a bloody battle would be unavoidable. Of course, the stronger everyone was, the better. Because the Leviathan of the Majestic Heaven sect had fallen, the 2 overlords of the Flying Cloud planet, the 4 Seas Majestic Empire and the Great Heaven Majestic Empire, finally rose, invading the territory that had originally belonged to the Majestic Heaven sect. Naturally, a great battle was unavoidable. However, this had nothing to do with Ling Han. He guarded his own territory, and used the Mo clan establishment to obtain a vast amount of level 4 godly metal for him to raise the level of his divine demon sword. Before setting off to search for the 5 sects, he had 2 goals. The first was to break through to the Sun-Moon tier, and the second was to raise the level of his divine demon sword to level 5. He had already cultivated to the pinnacle of the Mountain River tier, but breaking through to the Sun-Moon tier wasn't something that could be done overnight. This required accumulation, not just accumulation of comprehension of cultivation level, but also accumulation of origin power. Advancing from the Mountain River tier to the Sun-Moon tier was too big of an increase. Thus, it also required a lot of accumulation. Otherwise, if he forcefully broke through, he would only be sucked dry. As Ling Han accumulated, he also prepared godly medicines for himself. If he didn't have enough accumulation, he could still rely on a vast amount of godly medicines to replenish it. At the very least, he wouldn't have to suck his life essence dry. That would be too tragic. He didn't even have time to cultivate alchemy. Basically, he sat under the reincarnation tree every day, tempering his Mountain River tier to perfection while exploring the great Tao of the Sun-Moon tier. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. To immortals, half a year was like the blink of an eye, but to Ling Han and the others, it was more than 100 years of comprehension. Ling Han already had enough confidence that he could break through to the Sun-Moon tier, and it was at this moment that the Mo clan finally sent him a piece of good news. They had found the location of the 5 sects. The Cloud Apex planet was located in the Long Light Galaxy, and was about 200 years away from the Flying Cloud planet. This was an extremely long distance. Otherwise, the Mo clan wouldn't have taken so long to find out. They had also used merchants from galaxy to galaxy, and finally found out the location of the 5 sects. Thankfully, Hunyo had modified the cloud-piercing shuttle, and its speed was who knew how many times faster than ordinary starships. Moreover, it was also embedded with a star pattern formation, so there was no need to worry about getting lost in the galaxy. It would take about 2 years. Very good. Ling Han began to break through to the Sun-Moon tier. A mere 7 days later, he opened a brand new door. A red sun appeared in his dantian, and the heavenly tribulation also responded, immediately rolling over. Ling Han began the painful process again. He shattered his own godly bones, and tempered them under the heavenly tribulation, causing them to rise to the next level. Meanwhile, auctioning off the 4 drops of Thousand Source True Fluid and a large number of ancient pill recipes also allowed Ling Han to accumulate a vast amount of wealth. Not only did he pay off his old debts, but he also had a large amount of wealth left. Now, he exchanged all of it for level 4 godly metal, which he fed to the divine demon sword. At this moment, Ling Han finally allowed the divine demon sword to swallow the last piece of level 4 godly metal, and it reached a level of qualitative change, also advancing toward level 5. The man and the sword experienced the heavenly tribulation together. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Lightning intertwined, creating a terrifying scene. Ling Han was reduced to a pile of shattered bones, and a series of cracks actually appeared on the divine demon sword. However, it didn't shatter. Instead, it continuously expelled metal shards from its body. Those were shards, useless trash. This divine sword seemed to have developed its own intelligence, and was actively evolving toward a level of perfection. The lightning turned into rain, completely blocking Ling Han and the divine demon sword. Brilliant light illuminated the galaxy. Chapter 12:21. Ling Han endured the heavenly tribulation, tempering his true self in the heavenly lightning, and increasing his comprehension of the great Tao. Heavenly tribulation represented the strongest killing intent of the great Tao of heaven and earth. If he could comprehend such a great Tao, it would greatly increase his battle prowess. Ling Han was comprehending his own Tao. He had already grasped the embryonic form of the lightning sword technique, but this name did not live up to its name. It was only because this sword technique possessed the characteristics of speed and great destructive power that he named it the lightning sword technique. If it could also fuse with the power of heavenly lightning, then the lightning sword technique would live up to its name. How fast was heavenly lightning? What if it could also possess such characteristics? Though Ling Han had turned into dust, his divine sense was still stable. Under the tempering of the indestructible heaven's scroll, his divine sense was incredibly tough. Even if it left his body and turned into a ball of light, it would not be damaged by the heavenly tribulation. The strength of his divine sense had actually reached the level above the low extreme of the sun-moon tier, and below the medium extreme. Thus, the power of lightning at the early stage of the sun-moon tier naturally could not hurt him. In the heavenly tribulation, he could better comprehend the power of lightning, and directly understand its essence. Unfortunately, the heavenly tribulation comes too rarely, and it doesn't last long enough. Ling Han thought, but he suddenly had a flash of inspiration. I can only endure a few heavenly tribulations by myself, but can't I use the heavenly tribulation of others to endure it? If I can grasp the technique of lightning, then whether it is the might of my sword technique or my movement technique, they will all be greatly improved. Half a day later, the sky full of thunderclouds dissipated, and Ling Han channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid. His body immediately recovered, and he also felt an obvious change in his body. Sun-moon tier. His power was at least 1,000,000 times stronger than before he had endured the heavenly tribulation. As expected, this is a huge threshold. After crossing it, my power that could surpass 10 stars is now only 6 stars. If I want to regain the power of surpassing 10 stars, I must cultivate to the pinnacle level of the sun-moon tier. However, only those who have cultivated to the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier can have the power of 6 stars before the pinnacle level of the sun-moon tier. Furthermore, they have to reach the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. If it's an ordinary mountain river tier cultivator, they can at most possess a power surpassing 4 stars. Only by cultivating to the pinnacle level would they be able to surpass 4 stars, and their achievements in the pinnacle level would also range from 4 stars to 6 stars in power. My current power is comparable to the late stage of the medium extreme of the sun-moon tier. However, this is only power. In terms of my grasp of the regulations of heaven and earth, I'm still at the early stage of the low extreme of the sun-moon tier. Thus, even if I use some secret techniques, my battle prowess will only surpass 6 or 7 stars. Therefore, people say that 5-star geniuses only exist in legends. Although this is a bit exaggerated, it is actually very reasonable because there are too few people who have reached the pinnacle state. Ling Han was startled, and said, "Small tower, why hasn't the black tower changed?" He had broken through a major tier, so why hadn't the black tower opened up a new layer so that all 5 elements were present? You still have to rise another tier. It was rare for small tower to give a clear boundary. What? Ling Han almost jumped in fright. I have to reach the heavenly body tier to open the 5th level. Doesn't that mean that I can only open the 7th level when I reach the Genesis tier? Wrong. If you reach the Genesis tier, you can only open the 6th level, Small Tower said seriously. Ling Han was stunned. Then there are still 3 levels, and they can only be opened at the level of the celestial realm. Small Tower swayed back and forth. This was its nod. So, you have to cultivate as soon as possible. When the Black Tower is completely opened, I can also recover all my memories. Ling Han thought for a moment, and said, in that case, your memories haven't been destroyed, but rather sealed. Perhaps, Small Tower said calmly. Small Tower said calmly. Young man, work hard on your cultivation and think about it. If you make another breakthrough above the Genesis tier, you will be able to enter into the celestial realm, and in my vague memories, the people in the celestial realm should all have eternal life. What? Ling Han was shocked. The elites of the celestial realm actually had an unlimited lifespan? Then how powerful would this celestial realm be? Elites could continue to cultivate like this for billions, trillions of years, becoming stronger and stronger. No wonder there was a precious treasure like the reincarnation tree. Even Genesis tiers couldn't wait for 12 trillion years, but the elites of the celestial realm could. However, you don't have to be discouraged. Though the elites of the celestial realm have an unlimited lifespan, they still have heaven's decline. If they can't survive it, they will still be killed, Small Tower said calmly. Unlimited lifespan doesn't mean eternal indestructibility. Ling Han nodded. The original owner of the Black Tower should be an elite of the celestial realm, but didn't he still die? Young man, run towards the morning sun. Small Tower said. Ling Han was speechless. He discovered that this tool's spirit was becoming more and more black-bellied. He returned to the small town. Since he had already passed the heavenly tribulation and advanced into the sun-moon tier, he should also set off for the cloud apex planet. However, Feng Peyun and the others broke through one after another, so Ling Han could only slow down and set off after this tide of breakthrough passed. Feng Peyun and Mu Rongqing both advanced into the medium extreme of the mountain river tier, while Helian Tianyun was 1 level ahead, advancing into the high extreme, and Ding Ping was the most exaggerated, reaching the consummate level. If word of this got out, it would definitely scare people to death. It had only been a few short years, so how could there be such a frightening rate of improvement? But it should be known that with Ling Han's endless supply of alchemical pills to increase the accumulation of origin power, and with the reincarnation tree to comprehend Tao, if they still could not achieve such astonishing advancement, then would Feng Peyun and the others still have the right to be called prodigies? Ling Han did not remain idle either. When they passed the heavenly tribulation, Ling Han would freeload along. For others, this was practically seeking death. Of all things, he actually freeloaded on the heavenly tribulation. But for Ling Han, he no longer needed to shatter his godly bones to temper himself. He only needed to observe the power of the heavenly tribulation, so he naturally did not need to suffer at all. He only needed to quietly study. After passing the 4 heavenly tribulations, Ling Han cultivated in seclusion under the reincarnation tree for 3 days. When he opened his eyes, there was actually a flash of lightning. Compared to the lightning technique that I have grasped now, the thunderclap 9th heaven is practically trash. Ling Han shook his head. After all, the thunderclap 9th heaven was only the lowest level cultivation technique of the immortal realm, but the heavenly tribulation was derived from the great Tao of heaven and earth, so how could it compare? As my cultivation level becomes higher and higher, the heavenly tribulation that I pass will naturally become more and more powerful. Then, the power of lightning that I have grasped will also become stronger and stronger. With heaven and earth as my teacher, I will create my own Tao. Ling Han's gaze was determined. The path that he wanted to walk was becoming clearer and clearer. Since everyone had passed the heavenly tribulation, it was impossible for them to break through again in a short period of time, so Ling Han decided to set out. However, he had not set out yet, and unexpectedly encountered someone who was seeing him off. Empress Luan Xingit was not a clone, but rather her main body. "You're leaving?" she asked. Her beautiful face was shrouded in primal chaos, and her tone was calm. There was not the slightest fluctuation in her voice. Being strong enough to reach the heavenly body tier, she naturally could control her emotions very well. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, "At first, I wanted to go to Joint Peace Planet to say goodbye to you, but I did not think that you would come." Chapter 12:22. Empress Wan Xing dispersed the aura of chaos on her face, revealing her peerless beauty that could wreak havoc in the world, especially her enchanting charm. Even Hunyou's beauty was not inferior to hers, but in terms of charm, she was far inferior. After all, Hunyou was still young, and her charm was not yet developed, so she might not lose to her in the future. But now, Empress Wan Xing was definitely the number one troublemaker, no one else. Ling Han's eyes lit up. This troublemaker was really never tired of it. Furthermore, when he was with her, he would naturally forget everyone else, and only her could be tolerated. This was the charm of an empress. "I want to ask you some things," she said solemnly. "Hee, why are you so serious with me?" Ling Han said with a smile, and his eyes glanced down slightly. "Are you being disobedient, and want to be taught a lesson?" Empress Wan Xing knew where he was staring at, and couldn't help but feel embarrassed and annoyed. Although it wasn't her, the main body, who had been spanked, it was her divine sense that was in control, so she naturally felt the same. Now that Ling Han deliberately stared at her, she felt her face burn, and couldn't help but blush. "Taking liberties with me, aren't you afraid that I will suppress you?" She humphed, fully displaying the domineering nature of an empress. Ling Han coughed, clasped his hands, and said, "Greetings, Empress." "Too insincere." Empress Wan Xing casually raised a hand, and said, "Forget it, I have something to ask you." After hearing her say this twice, Ling Han also became serious. Though this empress was extremely charming, it was clear that she was an extremely thin-skinned person. She would not be able to withstand any teasing at all. His relationship with her was not so good that it was as if they were deeply in love, so it was best to stop before going too far. "What do you want to ask?" he asked. "Celestial Realm." Empress Wan Xing said, her pretty face having a complicated expression. There was loneliness and anger. Ling Han thought for a moment, and said, "Then enter the Black Tower, and call Small Tower." Empress Wan Xing couldn't help but pause. Entering the Black Tower, everything was under Ling Han's control. She had been spanked last time, and she still had lingering fears. Ling Han's face darkened, and he said, "Am I that kind of vile person?" Empress Wan Xing didn't reply, but her expression clearly said yes. Ling Han sat on the ground and said, "All right then. If you don't trust me, don't go in and cultivate in the future." "Humph. This world belongs to me, and everyone belongs to me. Everything that belongs to you belongs to me. It's just that I'm allowing you to possess them," Empress Wan Xing said proudly. "So, don't be mistaken." Looking at her proud appearance, Ling Han couldn't help but feel an itch in his heart. This gave him an incomparably strong desire to conquer her. The charm of this stunner seemed to have increased a little. Ling Han resisted the urge and said, "Forget it, let's not talk about this. Are you related to the immortal region?" Empress Wan Xing hesitated slightly before saying, "My ancestors came from the celestial realm." "What?" Ling Han was shocked. He suddenly clapped his hands, and said, "I know. Ancient divine tribes, are they all from the celestial realm?" Empress Wan Xing nodded. "That's right. The ancient divine tribes were all exiled from the celestial realm to the immortal realm. Because they have the bloodline of the celestial realm, they are relatively stronger." Ling Han looked at Empress Wan Xing in surprise. He had just mentioned the celestial realm, and now a descendant of the celestial realm came out. He said solemnly, "You said, exiled?" "The exact year can't be determined. There was a war in the celestial realm that affected the whole celestial realm. In that war, many elites died, and after the war ended, the losing side was all exiled from the celestial realm, Empress Luanxing said. Ling Han's heart thumped. This was definitely a shocking secret. Then do you want to return to the celestial realm? He asked. Empress Luanxing nodded slowly. Returning to the celestial realm is the belief of the 9 snake tribe, passed down from generation to generation. She looked at Ling Han, and continued, that little girl should be the successor of some great sect in the celestial realm. She was referring to Tigress. Rock Palace, Ling Han said. It has been too long, and only bits and pieces of the tribe's records about the celestial realm are left. Empress Luanxing sighed. In the ancestral land of the 9 snake tribe, there is a 9 snake pool. Every disciple of the 9 snake tribe needs to bathe in it to fully activate their bloodline. For the 9 snake tribe, this is the most important inheritance. So, the most important reason for you to return to the celestial realm is to retrieve the 9 snake pool? Ling Han asked. I can't. Empress Luanxing shook her head. The 9 snake pool is formed from the remains of the ancestor of the 9 snake tribe, and the remains of the ancestor are buried in the ancestral land. They have already become one with the mountains, and cannot be moved. So, if the 9 snake tribe wants to regain its glory, they can only return to the ancestral land, Ling Han said. Yes. A desolate expression appeared on Empress Luanxing's face. However, I am the only one left of the 9 snake tribe now. Don't worry. Ling Han reached out to place a hand on Empress Luanxing's shoulder. In the future, we will have many children, and strengthen the 9 snake tribe. Pa, his hand was sent flying by Empress Luanxing before he could even touch her. He gritted his teeth in pain. This empress was at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, and a casual slap from her was enough to break his bones. Don't be so talkative. Empress Luanxing chided. Ling Han snickered. If it had been any other man who dared to tease the empress like this, he would probably have been reduced to ashes by now. However, only his hand had been sent flying, which meant that he was still in the empress's heart. She had fought with an eternal river tier elite for his sake previously. Sharp tongue, soft heart, I like it. Ling Han nodded, and solemnly said, we will charge into the celestial realm together. Empress Luanxing pondered for a moment, and then said, I don't know what you want to do, but be careful on your journey. Don't worry, I will definitely return safe and sound, Ling Han said. The celestial realm, what kind of place is that? In the legendary celestial realm, elites can possess eternal lifespan, Empress Luanxing said. Eternal existence, once conflict arises, it is indeed impossible to resolve. Ling Han thought. These people had lived for too long, so they would naturally have nothing better to do after eating their fill, and would think of all sorts of nonsense. Moreover, generation after generation of old people could not die, so conflicts would only intensify, and ultimately develop into war. Then, since a war had erupted, there could possibly be a second and third war. The celestial realm was not necessarily a celestial realm. Don't worry about your great Ling Empire, I will guard it for you, Empress Luanxing continued. Then, with a wave of her sleeves, she said, I am leaving. Wait, Ling Han called out. Empress Luanxing stopped, and turned around, a questioning look on her face. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, this farewell will definitely be many years later before we can meet again. Won't you give me a hug? Empress Luanxing instantly rolled her eyes at him, and the aura of primal chaos enveloped her beautiful face again. She spat out a single word, scram. Chapter 12-24. After knowing the exact location of the 5 sects, Ling Han and the others immediately set off. After half a month, Ling Han had gained new insights on the refinement of the spiritual rain bone developing pill. He didn't start refining it, but meditated to make up for his shortcomings. He believed that if he started the furnace again, not only would he be able to guarantee success, but he would also improve greatly. They entered the territory of the Great Crimson Sun Imperial Empire, traveled for another 5 days, and arrived at the Chixia Mountain where the Cloud Phoenix sect was located. This was naturally to find the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden first, and then figure out how to overthrow the 5 sects. Though the actions of the 5 sects were definitely not allowed in the immortal realm, the lower realm had already opened the sky and arrived in the immortal realm, so there was naturally no evidence. How could they prove that the 5 sects had once refined the living beings of a small world into alchemical pills? Therefore, Ling Han naturally would not take the path of complaining. Instead, he would use his own hands to overthrow the 5 sects. This was even more satisfying. I wonder what is the cultivation of Sword Emperor and Setting Sun Saber Emperor? Ling Han said in his heart. This was an existence that he could only look up to in the past, but in the immortal realm, even the Sword Emperor and the others might not be qualified to be called geniuses. Perhaps they would still be able to maintain their astonishing talent in the immortal world and dazzle the world. He suppressed his competitive heart and came to a small town at the foot of Chixia Mountain. This small town was built on the Cloud Phoenix sect, and there were martial artists everywhere. Some of them were here to acknowledge a master, some were here to entrust the Cloud Phoenix sect with some matters, to solve some problems that they could not solve themselves, some were here to pay a visit, and some were here to do business. In short, whether a faction was prosperous or not could be determined by the development and liveliness of its affiliated towns. If it was so deserted that no one visited it, then the faction would naturally not be strong. According to this, the Cloud Phoenix sect was still living quite comfortably. Ling Han and his brothers, as well as Ding Ping and Helian Tianyun, stayed here for a few days, discreetly asking around, but to their disappointment, there was no news of the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden's whereabouts. Not only was there no news of the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden's whereabouts, even the Sword Emperor, the Setting Sun Saber Emperor, and the others had no clues. Yes. Ling Han clapped his hands. The Sword Emperor and the Setting Sun Saber Emperor lived up to their names in the small world, but would they still dare to call themselves that in the immortal realm? If you call yourself the Emperor, where does that put the Crimson Flames Emperor? In that case, they must have changed their nickname. Ling Han naturally knew of the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden's name, but this name was extremely strange. Back then, in order to find out about this name, he had even used the excuse of helping her concoct alchemical pills to half-joke and half-coerce the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. It was also after that time that he was targeted by the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and it seemed like he had greatly offended her. Moreover, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden had also warned him that he definitely couldn't reveal her name to anyone else. Then how do we find them? Ling Han was in a dilemma. After thinking for a while, he decided to find 4 disciples first. In his mind, when the 5 sects descended 10,000 years ago, it should have been the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden who had brought his 4 disciples to the immortal realm. Then, as long as he found his 4 disciples, he would naturally be able to find out where the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was now. Let's do that. Thus, he decided to inquire about the whereabouts of Jiang Yufeng, Chen Rui Jing, Yun Yong Wang, and Kang Xiu Yuan. Soon, he obtained some information. Yun Yong Wang and Kang Xiu Yuan were quite famous now, and they were the 2 management alchemists of the Han Lin Pavilion. Han Lin Pavilion, flipping the 2 words Han Lin, wasn't it Ling Han? Come, let's go to Big Trade City. The Han Lin Pavilion was located in Big Trade City, and Big Trade City was only a 2-day journey from Chixia Mountain. It was also the nearest large city to the Cloud Phoenix sect. They arrived very quickly, and found out after making some inquiries. This Han Lin Pavilion had only risen to prominence a few thousand years ago, but it was developing better and better recently. The 2 management alchemists had both broken through to level 5, and their natural talent was very shocking. Being able to break through to level 5 meant that their martial art tier had to have reached the Sun Moon tier as well. Otherwise, the power of their divine sense would not be enough to support the refinement of level 5 divine pills. Apart from a very few special cases, their divine sense was incredibly powerful. Ling Han nodded internally. The improvement of his 2 disciples was quite impressive. Because they specialized in alchemy, they could still advance from the shattering void tier to the sun-moon tier in 10,000 years. This improvement was very shocking, as expected of his disciples. Because this also involved his last life, Ling Han had Feng Peyun buy a courtyard in the city to stay. Then, they could go their separate ways, training while gathering information about the 5 sects. To them, the 5 sects were still colossal entities. Furthermore, this was an imperial empire, and there were extremely many heavenly body tier elites. Even eternal river tiers were counted in the tens or even hundreds. Who knew if the 5 sects had a powerful backer? Revenge was a must, but he definitely could not throw his life away as well. Ling Han walked slowly. This big trade city was also a city where humans and demonic beasts lived next to each other, giving him an urge to capture the demonic beasts that were walking beside him and make them into a delicious feast. He secretly cursed at his sins. A glutton's nature was hard to change. After a while, he arrived at the Han Lin Pavilion. So many people. At the entrance, there were 3 layers of people inside and 3 layers of people outside, so that not even water could pass through. Ling Han couldn't help but feel strange. This business was too good, wasn't it? Buying an alchemical pill was crowded to this extent. He heard the discussions of the people beside him, and finally realized that it wasn't that the Han Lin Pavilion's business was so good, but rather that someone was challenging them. The other party was an alchemist from the Treasure Forest Pavilion, and said that he wanted to spar with the Han Lin Pavilion in alchemy. That was what they said, but everyone was very clear that the Treasure Forest Pavilion was here to cause trouble, and suppress the Han Lin Pavilion's momentum. That was because the Treasure Forest Pavilion was originally the largest alchemical merchant in Big Trade City, but now the Han Lin Pavilion was rising strongly. Though it was far from threatening the position of the Treasure Forest Pavilion, there were signs of it. The Treasure Forest Pavilion was a colossal entity, and the Treasure Forest Pavilion in Big Trade City was only a branch. It was said that this alchemical merchant was spread throughout the entire imperial empire, and controlled astonishing wealth and power. Even the Crimson Flames Emperor had to give them some respect. Thus, now that an alchemist from the Treasure Forest Pavilion had come to cause trouble, naturally no one was good for the Han Lin Pavilion. Lost again. A cry of surprise came from the front of the crowd. Everyone shook their heads. As it turned out, the Han Lin Pavilion had already lost 4 matches in a row. Ling Han squeezed his way forward. What kind of power was he now? He only needed to circulate his sun-moon tier power slightly, and he easily squeezed his way to the front. This was already the interior of the Han Lin Pavilion, and there was a very large space in the center. There were 2 pill furnaces placed there, and the people from both sides were clearly standing behind 1 pill furnace each. Yun Yong Wang and Kang Xiao Yuan. Ling Han immediately discovered his 2 disciples. 10,000 years had passed, yet their appearances hadn't changed much. They only appeared calmer and more mature. Ha, we've competed for half a month, and you've also lost 4 matches in a row. It'll be the same even if we compete for a 5th match, an elder in his 60s said with a faint smile. He appeared to be brimming with confidence. In the past half a month, the Treasure Forest Pavilion had won completely in terms of refining level 1 divine pills all the way to level 4 divine pills. Not necessarily. Yun Yong Wang humphed. He then turned to Kang Xiao Yuan, and said, "Third, you or me?" "Me." Kang Xiao Yuan stepped forward. Chapter 1225. Although the Han Lin Pavilion had already lost 4 matches in a row, it was like a sect competing in martial arts. The 4 Mountain River tier cultivators could lose all their matches, but the Sun Moon tier cultivators could win 1 match. It was the same for alchemy. The Han Lin Pavilion had 2 level 5 alchemists. Thus, if they wanted to completely suppress the Han Lin Pavilion, they had to defeat these 2 level 5 alchemists. Of course, their previous victories weren't in vain. It proved that the Treasure Forest Pavilion was superior to the Han Lin Pavilion in terms of level 1 to level 4 alchemists. The Treasure Forest Pavilion was indeed quite ruthless. They wanted to deal a heavy blow to the entire Han Lin Pavilion. Thus, if people wanted to purchase alchemical pills, they would definitely consider the Treasure Forest Pavilion first. There was nothing they could do about it. After all, the quality of their pills was higher. Every pill was 30% poisonous. One couldn't eat too many pills. Thus, when the quantity was limited, they would definitely choose the higher quality pills. Thus, as long as the Treasure Forest Pavilion defeated the two level 5 alchemists of the Han Lin Pavilion, the Treasure Forest Pavilion would naturally win this match. Moreover, this match was being held in public, and it had been going on for half a month. Who in the city didn't know about this? Kang Xiaoyuan walked down, and asked, "Who wants to compete with me?" "I'll go." A middle-aged man walked out. His appearance wasn't very impressive, but his body exuded a strong medicinal scent. This was the result of working with alchemical pills and medicinal ingredients for many years. "Liang Jinbo," Kang Xiaoyuan said in a deep voice. "Ha, you recognize me?" the middle-aged man asked. Kang Xiaoyuan chuckled, and said, "I've long heard of Grandmaster Liang's great name. I heard that Grandmaster Liang was already a level 5 alchemist 100,000 years ago. You're probably not far from level 6 now, right?" Liang Jinbo revealed a proud expression. Alchemy was just like martial art. Every step forward was incredibly difficult. Even though he had already been a level 5 alchemist 100,000 years ago, he was still at this cultivation level now. One had to know how long it took to advance from the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier to the medium extreme. Those with better talent would need 400,000 to 500,000 years. Thus, he only needed 100,000 years to become a level 6 alchemist. This was actually very, very impressive. He was completely worthy of being called a prodigy. "Kang Xiaoyuan, you're also a prodigy of alchemy. Why don't you take the Han Lin Pavilion and join our Treasure Forest Pavilion?" Liang Jinbo offered. Kang Xiaoyuan shook his head, and said, "The Han Lin Pavilion is the blood, sweat, and tears of us brothers. We definitely won't let it collapse." "Ha, then I have nothing to say." Liang Jinbo extended his hand. "Let's compete. Please." Liang Jinbo paused for a moment, then said, "Since it's my side who is challenging you, and I'm older than you by many years, so I can be considered half a senior, then let me decide what pill to refine first." There was a huge difference, because even though they were both 5th-tier medicinal pills, there was still a difference in difficulty. Those who chose first would be at a disadvantage, while those who chose later could calmly make adjustments according to their own strength. Kang Xiaoyuan didn't try to show off. It was true that the other party had more than 100,000 years of experience in alchemy than him, so he didn't have much of an advantage. "I'll concoct the 4 directions elixir," Liang Jinbo said in a deep voice after some consideration. Kang Xiaoyuan was slightly astonished. The 4 directions elixir was one of the more difficult pills to refine even among level 5 pills. Thus, if he wanted to defeat his opponent, he would definitely have to choose a more difficult pill. Of course, he could also choose an easier pill, and then hope that Liang Jinbo would make a mistake and explode. Then, he would only need to concoct a level 5 pill to win. But if Ling Han wasn't confident, why would he say that he wanted to concoct the 4 directions elixir at a time like this? He pondered for a moment, and then said, "Then I'll concoct the 4 directions elixir as well." Both of them were concocting the 4 directions elixir, so the competition was even simpler. Whoever could concoct more pills in a cauldron would naturally be the winner. Moreover, if the number of pills was the same, they could also compare the quality of the pills. "Then let's begin." Both of them first prepared their materials. The Treasure Forest Pavilion had come prepared, so they naturally had brought their materials with them. Moreover, Kang Xiaoyuan was the owner of this place, so he naturally chose his materials very quickly. After a short while, the two of them said to begin, and then began to concoct pills. They sorted out and refined the materials, and then started a fire. Soon, the two of them entered the most crucial stage of concoction. Ling Han only pondered for a moment, and then shook his head. With his eyesight as the alchemy emperor, he could already tell that Kang Xiu Yuan was no match for Liang Jinbo. Kang Xiu Yuan's talent in alchemy was indeed not inferior to Ling Han's. In fact, it was even superior. Unfortunately, Ling Han had been a level 5 alchemist for 100,000 years more than him. This was a very, very large gap. A thought flashed through Ling Han's mind, and he walked towards Yunyong Wang. Stop! The members of the Han Lin pavilion hurriedly blocked a young man's path upon seeing him walk over so boldly. Yunyong Wang also walked over upon hearing this. After meeting Ling Han's eyes, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, and say, "Have we met before?" This person's eyes gave him a sense of déjà vu. Moreover, there were far too many complicated emotions contained in his eyes. Ling Han lowered his gaze slightly, and said with a smile, "I want to join the Han Lin pavilion. Is that okay?" Yunyong Wang was astonished. This young man actually wanted to join the Han Lin pavilion. Didn't he see that the Han Lin pavilion was in a very bad situation right now? Yet, he actually wanted to join. Strange. He asked, "You're also an alchemist?" Ling Han broke into a smile, and replied, "I've studied for a few years." Only a few years? Yunyong Wang pondered for a moment, then nodded, and said, "All right." A person's heart was revealed in times of crisis. Ling Han actually wanted to join the Han Lin pavilion at this time. It was like sending charcoal in snowy weather, and it made him feel very comfortable. Thus, no matter how strong Ling Han's alchemy skills were, he accepted this kind gesture. "Young man, how should I address you?" he asked again. Ling Han. What? Yunyong Wang exclaimed in shock, and almost jumped up. This person actually had the same name as his deceased master. Before this, he had already felt that Ling Han was very familiar, and now with this name, his heart couldn't help but tremble. Unfortunately, no matter how he looked, he couldn't find any similarities between this Ling Han and his master. Moreover, before he had gone to the immortal realm, his master had already disappeared for several hundred years, so he should have indeed died. It's just a coincidence, he thought. Ling Han, where are you from? Yunyong Wang couldn't help but ask. Joint Peace Planet, Ling Han answered. He didn't directly reveal his identity. Firstly, there were many eyes and ears here. If he revealed that he was from the lower realm, it was extremely likely that the 5 sects would find out, and they would target him in advance. Secondly, 10,000 years had already passed, so he didn't know whether these disciples of his had changed or not. This change referred to the bottom line of good and evil. He had to observe them first. Yunyong Wang was slightly at a loss. The immortal realm was too big, and unless one was a businessman, the majority of people would stay on the same planet for their entire lives. Moreover, the Joint Peace Planet was 200 years away from this planet at normal travel speed, so it was normal that he hadn't heard of it. Oh. He nodded, a sliver of disappointment appearing on his face. However, he felt more at ease, and focused on the competition between Liang Jinbo and Kang Xiu Yuan. This was related to the Han Lin Pavilion's future. Chapter 12:26. Ling Han didn't mind. Hadn't he joined the Han Lin Pavilion so that he could replace Kang Xiu Yuan after he lost? With the Alchemy Emperor around, how could he lose? Moreover, the refinement of a level 5 divine pill would take about 10 days. Thus, Ling Han left to find Feng Peyun and the others. He couldn't waste any time. Moreover, he had to think about how he was going to explain his other identity to them. He decided to take it slow and explain it to Kang Xiu Yuan and the others after he acknowledged them. 8 days later, Ling Han returned to the Han Lin Pavilion. The competition between Kang Xiu Yuan and Liang Jinbo was nearing its end. However, once pill refinement began, completing 1% was the same as completing 99%. There couldn't be any distractions or mistakes. Otherwise, all of their efforts would be wasted. Thus, they became even more solemn at this time. Half a day later, the two of them stopped almost at the same time. Open. Both of them slapped the lid of their cauldrons. They were about to open their cauldrons. However, Kang Xiao-yuan tapped the cauldron repeatedly with his hands, causing the flames to jump rapidly a few times. This was the three-fire guide, Ling Han's innovation in alchemy. Liang Jinbo displayed his cauldron to everyone first. There were 3 round pills inside, and they were about to fly out of the cauldron when he forcefully suppressed them and sealed them in the cauldron. Kang Xiao-yuan tilted his cauldron slightly, and said, "I didn't disappoint you, Brother Liang." Astonishingly, there were also 3 pills in his pill furnace. However, Kang Xiao-yuan secretly wiped his forehead. If it weren't for the fact that he had mastered the 3-fire guide and improved the quality and success rate of the pills at the last moment, he would only be able to refine 2 pills in this cauldron. He could only secretly hope that his opponent could also refine 3 pills. Otherwise, he would definitely lose. Then let's compare the quality. The two of them took out their pills, poured them into their palms, and placed them together. For alchemists like them, they only needed to look and smell to determine the quality of a pill. Kang Xiao-yuan's expression quickly changed. Whether it was in terms of color or smell, his opponent's quality was superior to his, and it wasn't just by a little. There was a clear disparity. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he sighed and said, "I lost." Ha 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 ha. Liang Jinbo roared with laughter. The Hanlin Pavilion had suffered a crushing defeat in this spar. As the main force of this match, he was naturally extremely delighted. "Don't be disappointed," Ling Han suddenly said. "He's stronger than you because he became a level 5 alchemist long ago. He's been cultivating for tens of thousands of years longer than you. If you train for a few more years, it won't be difficult for you to surpass him." Kang Xiao-yuan was startled, and he walked toward Ling Han with a confused expression. Who was this guy? Why was he acting like an old man? His tone made him sound like he was his master. Previously, he had been concentrating on concocting pills, and wouldn't know even if the sky collapsed. Thus, he naturally didn't know who Ling Han was, nor did he know that Ling Han was now a member of the Hanlin Pavilion. But Liang Jinbo was furious. What was the meaning of this? A loss was a loss. Was this an excuse? He couldn't help but snort coldly, "Are you guys sore losers?" Lose? Ling Han laughed loudly, shook his head, and said, "The spar isn't over yet, so how is this a loss?" "Not over yet. Your strongest alchemist has already participated, so what else do you want?" "Hold on, who is this brat? Where did he come from?" Liang Jinbo asked, "Who is this person?" "Brother Kang, Brother Yun, since when did this person become the master of the Hanlin Pavilion?" Ling Han waved his hand, and said, "I'm a newly hired alchemist of the Hanlin Pavilion. In the next match, I'll compete with you. Are there any level 6 or level 7 alchemists? Take them out for a spin." "Fuck. Take them out for a spin. Do you think alchemists are dogs? You actually dare to spar?" This infuriated Liang Jinbo. There was a sinister look in his eyes, and he said, "Brother Kang, Brother Yun, how long do you plan to let this brat run wild?" Kang Xiao-yuan was just about to speak when he saw Ling Han walk over and snatch the 3 alchemical pills from his hand. Although his cultivation level was also at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, it was completely insufficient in front of Ling Han. "If a tiger doesn't show its might, you'll think I'm a sick cat." Ling Han tossed the 3 alchemical pills back into the alchemy cauldron, and then began to refine them. "What? You've already refined the alchemical pills, and you're actually going to refine them again? Are you fucking retarded?" To say nothing of alchemical pills, even forged tools weren't something that could be tossed into the fire to refine if one wasn't satisfied. God tools contained the will of martial art. Carelessly refining them would only erase the will of martial art, and destroy the god tool. It was the same for alchemical pills. However, the divine patterns within them were interwoven with the regulations of heaven and earth, and they were even more fragile. Why did one have to be so careful in every step of pill refinement? That was because the cauldron would be ruined if even one of the divine patterns was interwoven wrongly. Kang Xiao Yuan was just about to stop him, yet Yun Yong Wang pulled him back. He was filled with confusion, and asked, "Why?" "His name is Ling Han," Yun Yong Wang said. "What?" Kang Xiao Yuan was stunned. However, he immediately shook his head. Ling Han definitely couldn't be their master. He had died over 10,000 years ago. However, because they had the same name, he also chose to let Ling Han fool around for once. Ling Han continued to refine the alchemical pills, and the flames burned fiercely. Soon, an astonishing medicinal fragrance wafted out, and it could be smelled in a radius of 5 kilometers. Huh? The cauldron actually didn't explode? Liang Jinbo was incredibly astonished. Level 5 divine pills contained a massive amount of energy. If they were refined by this kind of flame, it would be very easy for the balance within them to be disrupted. As a result, the terrifying energy would explode. In the best-case scenario, the cauldron would explode, and in the worst-case scenario, it would cause a massive explosion. This explosion was comparable to the full power attack of 10 or even 100 elites at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. This was because this was a concentrated explosion of energy. It was like the ultimate arrow, and its might was far beyond one's cultivation level. However, even though Ling Han was fooling around, this cauldron of alchemical pills actually didn't explode. This was far too strange. It was practically unbelievable. Could it be that he didn't put the alchemical pills in at all? Ling Han's expression was extremely focused. He was trying to improve the quality of the alchemical pills. This was extremely difficult to achieve, even for an alchemy emperor like him. However, fortunately, this was only a level 5 divine pill. Meanwhile, his alchemy level had already reached level 7, so there was a chance that he could succeed. The difficulty was far too high, and it was no less than refining a cauldron of level 7 divine pills. Thus, even Ling Han had to be extremely careful. He extracted the divine patterns within the godly medicine, and they continuously intertwined as he made subtle adjustments. Improving the quality of the alchemical pills wasn't the same as refining them all over again. Thus, this process didn't take much time. After merely 2 hours, Ling Han stopped. The process of improving the quality of the alchemical pills had already been completed. He opened the cauldron, and retrieved the alchemical pills from within. He then tossed them toward Liang Jinbo, and said, "Frog in a well, learn well." Liang Jinbo subconsciously caught them. His eyes swept over them, and an expression of disbelief instantly spread across his face. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.